Beyond Binaries, Understanding Sexual Identities and Queer Rights Issues in India. Day 5. Namaste and greetings. I, Samriddhi, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav, एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, नई दिल्ली, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI #webpolicylearning. Today, we are gathered here for day 5 of Beyond Binaries, Understanding Sexual Identities and Queer Rights Issues in India, an online international summer school program, a 5-day immersive online certificate training course. This training program is organized by the IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Center, GISC. This program has an excellent panel of experts who will be sharing their expertise for this 5-day immersive online certificate training course. Our chair for the program is Professor Vibhuti Patel, distinguished visiting professor IMPRI. The distinguished expert panel includes Maya Avasthi ji, Dr. Kaustav Padmapati ji, Sunil Gyani ji, Rituparna Neok ji, Dr. Aksa Sheikh ji, Aro Akam ji, Vikramaditya Sahai ji, Professor Mala Ramanathan ji, Professor Pushpesh Kumar ji, Mr. Adhiraj Parasathi ji, Professor Veena Vaswani ji, Vaijayanti Vasanta Mokli ji, Dr. Pratiti Barman ji, Harish Iyer ji, Rituparna Bora ji, Dr. Devolina Deji, Dr. Devashish Maitra ji, Dr. Lavanya Arvind ji. The convener for this course is Dr. Simi Mehta, CEO and Editorial Director at IMPRI. A warm welcome to the course Beyond Binaries, Understanding Sexual Identities and Queer Rights Issues in India. Your active involvement in this program highlights the critical importance of engaging in open and meaningful discussions surrounding sexual identities and queer rights. By exploring these topics together, we can deepen our understanding, challenge societal norms, and work towards fostering an inclusive and equitable society for all. Thank you for joining us on this transformative journey. We have also shared the study materials and course outline via email on the topic related to Beyond Binaries for better perusal and understanding. Before we start today's session, I would like to announce the housekeeping rules. It is imperative that you join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation. Share your questions in the Q&A box and not in the chat box. The questions must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise, and please refrain from making general comments in the questions to save time. Our theme for day 5 is solidarity and cultural dimensions. Our session for day 5 will cover topics of Is the Vagabond Happy? Friendship, Family, and Queerness by Dr. Devolina Deji, Unlearning Gender, Masculinities, and Queer Space in India and Beyond by Dr. Devashish Maitra ji, Towards Inclusivity in Disaster Management, Reflections on Challenges Faced by LGBTQ+ communities in Disaster Situations by Dr. Lavanya Arvind ji, and Contemporary Legal and Judicial Proceedings and Way Forward by Maya Avasthi ji. Now, without any further ado, let us start the program. It is my honor and privilege to invite the chair for the program, Professor Vibhuti Patel, to start the program with her opening chair remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Samriddhi, and welcome, Dr. Devolina Deji. And I would like to, first of all, thank IMPRI team for its hard work. Dr. Arjun Kumar, Dr. Simi Mehta, Vidya, Vaijayanti, Naina Agarwal, Avash, Samriddhi. It's a lot of work to have this 5 days course and also interacting with 20 resource persons. 20. And we had, let us first have a recap on day 1 when we discussed the history and political dimensions. It also involved conceptual clarity, terminology, the language used by the queer studies. In day 2, queer politics in contemporary political atmosphere was discussed, in which both travels and tribulations and also achievements of mobilization at a grassroots level were also narrated, and question of solidarity that became prominent. In day 3, social and health dimension, we all began with the need for enumeration and visibility of queer communities in statistics, indicators, and the data sets that we have, because those who are not enumerated, they are left out of policy making and policy implementation. In the health dimension, the commercialization of health and the misogyny and gender stereotypes, how do they make a transgender community and the queer community at the receiving end of the system. And so many examples were shared by the participants, practicing doctors. On day 4, yesterday, we had legal rights legal issues and the rights dimension were discussed. The first presentation by Dr. Pratiti Burman was based on the findings and her analysis of a research on queer identity and rights experiences from Assam. She began with narration of great gender inclusive socio-cultural and historical legacy of Assam, which was included in Jatra Mobile Theatre, a traditional drama which was started in the 16th century by Srimati Sakar Deva, and which man took role of women. In 2014, Assam had first queer pride walk. All Assam Transgender Association that works with the transgender community on the issues of safe sex and HIV/AIDS, and several NGOs which provide mental health counseling to transgender community. But largely, the scenario was quite depressing. The isolation, rejection, stigmatization faced by transgender, especially in her study, there were the cis gay men were there, and all of them, because of the persecution they faced from their family, so many of them would go away to metropolis or a big city, and maybe 20-30 years down the line, they would come back when they are aging. As per the official record, over 11,000 transgender persons in Assam have a voter card, but they don't have any other documents which would give them citizenship rights. So when government decided to go for this issue, and all over the country also we had so many protests. The second presentation by Harish Iyer, which talked about the queer rights at the workplace, and he introduced himself as a workplace activist and with a mission of promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI is a very fashionable term in the current context. Harish stated that there is no change without friction, and he has to fight for common challenge such as restrooms for trans people, and so many times they had to repurpose the existing restroom for the all people restroom, and he insisted the gender variant person's choice should come first. Second controversial issue he discussed was a dress code policy that needs to be gender fluid and gender non-conforming, and the grounding policies of every organization must transcend the gender and sexuality framework, so that intersex person and intersex employees are also not excluded. He emphasized that every institution should have a mandate for one overarching human rights policy with email ID for communication, DEI policy for hiring drive or a diversity and access, code of conduct with regard to queer persons, and the fourth is a POSH committee, which should include the members from the transgender community. And he also talked about the elitism in Pride Parade, and he also talked about the intersectionality within the queer community. And he concluded his speech by affirming with regards to policy and practice, where he says that onus of inclusion lies on those who are included, not those who are excluded. So today's day becomes very important because it is about the solidarity, you, me, and all others. We have to, what we do, whether we stick out our neck whenever we see any problem or any discrimination against queer community, wherever, whether at a workplace or in educational institution and in our neighborhood. Third presentation by Rituparna Boraji, she spoke on the linkages of sexuality and gender with other developmental issues, and also she also talked about the concepts of sexual norms and sexual hierarchy. And she also asked so many questions to which the participants actively responded. And she said difference between sex and sexuality, difference between gender and gender norms, all these questions she asked. And she also explained Gail Rubin's diagram on sexual hierarchy based on division of a charm circle that is ensured with economic and social benefits, and the outer limits which makes people live under deprivation, rejection, guilt, and incarceration. And to combat this evil, what we need is solidarity and struggle. The last presentation by Jayanti Vasanta Mogliji, he made a very, very passionate speech on transgender and horizontal reservation, litigation, and advocacy in India by analyzing several cases, including Saurabh Yadav versus State of UP, Indra Saini versus Union of India, Tanushri versus State of Telangana, Sharda versus Member Secretary of Tamil Nadu Recruitment Board, and Madras High Court, and interim orders of the Telangana government regarding recruitment of transgender persons, the question of the discrimination that recruitment policies have, which has a very, very unethical ramifications for transgender applications who are made to compete with the cis men in recruitment. And he said that the case is still pending. He reported Dr. Ruth John Paul as struggles because she was turned away by 15 hospitals in Hyderabad in spite of being a well-qualified postgraduate medical person. And he said that Article 15.3 that refers to SC, ST, socially and educationally backward classes and most backward classes, as Tamil Nadu government calls. I think similarly, horizontal invitation, reservation must be put into practice for the transgender community. He concluded by stating that India's queer community is fighting to realize its civil rights on employment and education front. The Indian Supreme Court has begun hearing petitions on same-sex marriage on the ground of marriage equality from several petitioners from transgender community, and the struggle goes on, and solidarity by all is needed of an hour. Flow of the subject matter, the rich evidence-based content of all 4 resource persons, which kept the participants engaged for 4 hours. Like we started the session at 6 p.m., continued till 10 p.m. And I think that has been all 4 days were like that, very, very engaging. And today we have Dr. Debolina De, Dr. Debashish Mitra, Dr. Lavanya Shanbok, and Madam Maya Avastiji. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Now we start with our sessions. I would like to request Dr. Debolina De to take the session forward. Dr. De is an assistant professor, Department of English, Ramjas College, University of Delhi, and will be talking about Is the Vagabond Happy? Friendship, Family, and Queerness. Over to you, Dr. De.
Thank you so much, Samriddhi, Vithita, Professor Patel, and Arjun, and the entire team of IMPRI for having me. Like queer panels always begin with a confession. It's either a confession about one's gender identity, one's sexual identity. I think on this panel, my confession is a little problematic, as in my own problem with my own identity. What is my identity? Whenever I'm asked to be on a queer panel, to be on a panel on queerness, I'm in a bit of a fix because as an academic, as a researcher, my PhD was on the history of science. And yet I'm asked to be on queer panels and talk very authoritatively on queerness. And today the talk that I will give is actually from this binary position of being queer and being an academic who doesn't necessarily talk directly on the topic of gender and sexuality, but nonetheless, I'm queer. So when we talk about being beyond binaries, today the talk that I will be giving is both autoethnographic. I will be talking about my own work, but it is also about a historical period. So the talk that I will be giving today is, can we have the second slide first, please? The talk that I will be giving today is like a hinge. I see myself, I see my identity, both these identities, as an academic researcher who doesn't directly work on queerness, but I also teach on queerness. I also advocate on queerness. Both these identities as sort of two sides, and I see myself like a hinge, like a door hinge, which can both open and close. So it is from this hinged position that I will be giving my talk today. So the position from which I am going to be giving this talk is strange, you can say, and queer, you can say, because I am actually occupying an identity position, but I am also arguing against it. I'm saying that queerness is not an essence, right? So queerness is also a journey. I think between 25 and my early 30s, I found myself to be more concerned with ideas of sexuality. But as at 38, I asked myself, how long is the memory of your difference going to be relevant in other people's experience of queerness? Can we create a vocabulary of queerness that is also relevant to other people? Because as you can see from so many people who talk about LGBTQ issues, queerness is also a rapidly growing and changing organism. So what I find myself is pushing against the noun queer. And what I will be doing, in fact, today is move, because my discipline is literature, I work with language, is that I'm going to be moving between the noun queer, the adjective queer, and the verb queer, okay? And I will be doing that by looking at the echoes of this performativity of language, how language can twist, how it can turn, and what happens when it twists and turns, right? So I will be beginning with the first quote by Michel Foucault. I circulated two essays by Michel Foucault's Friendship as a Way of Life. This is something that I also teach in my tutorials when I teach a course on interrogating queerness. So I'm going to begin with a quote from that. So I'm sure most of you know by now that homosexuality is not the same as queerness. Queerness is also something that departed from what was considered homosexual, right? But identity formation is always discursive. It is always about a moment in time. So I'm going to begin with a quote by Michel Foucault, which says, "Homosexuality is a historic occasion to reopen affective and relational virtuities, not so much through the intrinsic qualities of the homosexual, but because the slantwise position of the latter, as it were, the diagonal lines he can lay out in the social fabric, allow these virtualities to come to light." I'll come back to this quote if you don't understand it. And please, the first slide, please. And I begin with a quote from Bell Hooks. So I look at homosexuality like Foucault does, Foucault does, as a historical experience, right? From which queerness departs in the early 90s. And this is what Bell Hooks has said in this podcast called "Are You Still a Slave? Liberating the Black Female Body?" And I find this quote fascinating because I'll just read it out and then discuss it. As the essence of queer, I think of Tim Dean's work on being queer, and queer not as being about who you're having sex with. That can be a dimension of it, but queer as being about the self that is at odds with everything around it and has to invent and create and find a place to speak and to thrive and to live. I find this quote fascinating because what Bell Hooks is doing is something very interesting with language. she's saying that something does not have an essence. As the essence of queer, she's saying that, the essence of queer is not necessarily who you have sex with. That can be a part of it, but it is the self. And look at the writing of that, right? As the essence of queer, I think of Tim Dean's work on being queer and queer not as being queer and queer not as being, right? So right in that quote itself, you see that hinged performativity of language as the essence of queer. Imagine trying to define something that does not have essence. How do you define something that is in the second quote, up to the second quote, this what Foucault says, the slantwise position of the latter. I'm going to come to the slantwise position, but before I begin my paper, I'm not done with my confessional. So what I am doing in this paper is I am trying to look into a historical archive and see if it is possible to develop a vocabulary of queerness along margins of historical alphabets. Like, are there other forms of queerness that is possible? And in asking this question, I am not looking to depoliticize sexuality. I'm not saying, oh, all of us are queer and gender and sexuality don't matter to the topic of queerness. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying, just like Bell Hooks says, I'm trying to ask if it is possible to invent political alignments. And if it is, and I'm doing it with three things. Firstly, the history of law and the history of language. What do we do with populations we cannot categorize? So LGB at least is still something that we have been able to categorize. There are, a section of population who are asking for marriage rights. That during the same time, the transgender bill went to the Supreme Court and that petition was rejected. What do we do with categories of population we cannot categorize? It's like this excess that keeps spilling. So even though I came to queerness, the category of queerness initially because of who I was attracted to, and in that sense, it was because of gender and sexuality, I stayed in this category of queerness because at one point I realized I was constantly pushing the boundaries of desire. And instead, I was looking for a mode of life. I was no longer happy with the noun queer. I was the adjective queer. I was strange, I was odd. And what that did was it pushed me to a mode of life that departed from commonsensical ways of life. And this is what Michel Foucault again says. If you've read that essay called Friendship, that interview, not an essay, sorry, called Friendship as a Way of Life, he says that, when Foucault's giving this interview in the 80s, the term queer is not so much in use. So he's still calling it homosexuality. But he's trying to tap into the queer possibility of homosexuality. And he's saying, and I quote, things that in our rather sanitized society can't allow a space for without fearing the formation of new alliances and tying together of unseen lines of force. So one example he gives is, what does it mean for men to fight alongside each other? What kind of emotions do men feel when they fight alongside each other in a war? They have to save each other's lives. How do we define that as? And so why I circulated Friendship as a Way of Life, that essay, is because in my reading of queerness, friendship is also without any model. In a sense, friendship, there is no defined way of doing friendship. Nobody can say this is the model of friendship. And that's very similar to the idea of queerness that I want to put forth, which is that there is no defined way of being queer. And So this paper then that begins with this 10-minute long confession comes out of a playful self-reflection. And, when I was invited to be on this panel, I thought, because queerness for me is at its best expression is about a certain playfulness. I thought, so this paper comes out of that playful self-reflection between these binaries of my own identity, when I'm thought of as, okay, assistant professor, but also queer. How do I think with these two categories, right? Okay, so with that, I'm going to start with the figure of the vagabond, tell you a little bit about who the vagabond is that I'm talking about, what does the vagabond do, and the way that I'm going to make you think is through synonymous exchanges. Let me look at this slide number 5. So what do I mean by synonymous exchanges? So the similar words, right? Words that evoke other words like invert, queer, sodomite, sapphist, dyke, all words that are associated in terms of identity with each other. Similarly, with the vagabond, you have words like vagrant, destitute, vagabond, tramp, unsettled, poor, rogue, loitering, idle, all of these. So the way that I think, and I'm trying to sort of evoke in you, is what words, what vocabularies sort of come together to create an idiom of queerness. And what feelings, what strange feelings, what new affects can we learn from queerness, right? I also want to, before I start this paper, just want you to look at this. Remember this quote by Foucault where I said, the slantwise position of the latter. What is the slantwise position? If queerness is nothing, then what is it? When I teach my students, slide number 4, please. I think of straightness like this letter O. It's complete, it's round, it's self-contained. And when I talk of the slant, and when Foucault talks of the slantwiseness, when I read Foucault as the slantwiseness, I think of the letter Q. That roundness, but with something that cuts it, something that is tangential to the center. Think of the O as a center. Think of the O as common sense. Think of the O as the norm, right? It occupies a centrality. And now think of the letter Q. Look at the shapes of the letter Q. This is, in my reading of Foucault's, that slantwiseness. What is queerness, right? It is that slight kink, it's that slight tangent, it's that slantwise position around the common sense or the norm. Okay, so with that long confessional introduction, I'm going to go into the historical archive. So in English law, I'm going to be moving through time. So I'm going to be coming to 1834, I'm going to be coming to 1824 and 1898. So just make a timeline in your head around those dates. If you look at English law, there's something strange that happens in 1834. England has always had a population of vagabonds. Vagabonds are people who are also called vagrants, they're called destitutes, they're called beggars, they're called strollers. Basically, the fabric of English society is centered around family. Family is anything that settles down in a place that can be accountable in terms of a parish. So, this is obviously before migration happens. So, in English law, the vagrant or the vagabond has always occupied a position of deep suspicion. And the word vagrant, in fact, becomes synonymous with the word impotent poor, unsettled poor, an impotent person begging out of its limit. And by the time you come to the 19th century, in 1834, this vagabond population starts to create a problem because they are idle, they don't fit into the industrial economy. And this is very important because the three categories of queerness that I'm interested in, that I think cuts across gender and sexuality, is A, friendship, B, time, and 3, family. One of the central ways of using queerness to critique common sense is to actually critique the institutional role of the family as an economic model. So this is where I'm coming at. So what happens in 1834 is the vagrant is pathologized. There is a new poor law. And the new poor law says that vagrants are actually like contagious examples. So let me just read this out. So you have a long history. In fact, 1533 is when you have the Buggery Act, which is again associated with the sodomy, directly linked to sexuality. And 1536 is when Henry VIII passes the Act of Vagrancy, okay, against vagrancy, against loitering poor, against people who the nation has always seen as being suspect, spreading disease, spreading idleness, being roguish, being bullying, all of these. And this is what the report says, the 1834 report. It says all wandering persons, let me look at the quote here. Yeah, slide 6, please. So by 1598, 1547, 1531, the law is amended many times. And by 1834, this is what the report says about vagabonds and vagrants and idle poor. All wandering persons and common laborers, being persons able in body, using loitering and refusing to work for such reasonable wages as is taxed or commonly given in such parts where such persons do or shall happen to dwell or abide, not having living otherwise to maintain themselves. The vagabond, the idle poor, people who can work but will not, become a problem in this new industrial economy because they upset the demand and supply curve. Because vagabonds, by being idle, actually become a burden on the state, on charity, on relief. And actually, the history of the vagabond is that the vagabond was branded with the letter V. So you see right from the 16th century, the history of the vagabond as the cultural other, as someone who is used to being sort of a pathological figure, a figure who is diseased, who can work but will not work, is already present, right? And what the vagabond does not fit in with is this new technology of industrial profit, of industrial mobility, where if you work hard, you become successful. The vagrant lies outside of this economic logic of profit, of demand and supply, and in fact is grouped not only with poor, but with beggars, with idle people, and with and this is what a quote says. Let me see if I've, no, okay. So this is what the report says, and something important happens in the 1834 report. It says, when one pauper has been accustomed to receive charity or relief, another thinks himself ill-used if it not be allowed to him also. The example becomes contagious. What happens here? Why is this? Why am I reading this out? Why is this important? This word contagious. There's something performative that happens in terms of language. Not only is contagious here used as a metaphor, but Susan Sontag in Illness as Metaphor says that it's this performative nature of language, how the noun becomes an adjective. And this is the power of the metaphor. As long as the word is contagion, it has to be either fever, it has to be typhus. Remember, this is also the time where a lot of disease and classification of disease is happening. So as long as if you say that a certain population is contagion, then you'll have to define them and say that, oh, no, they spread fever, they spread cholera, they spread typhus. But something else happens when the noun becomes the adjective. A very, very important performative. The entire population can be pathologized as being diseased, where the population is blamed for carrying connotations of disease. And my paper and my thinking is really about this connotative exercise. So what happens is the idle, unproductive poor, by being associated with the idea of poor, you also become associated with the idea of disease. Now, what does it have to do with family, right? Why, okay, they're diseased, but what does it have to do with family? Now, the Poor Law Report actually argues that, it's not enough. It's not, one metaphor is not enough, but the report argues that actually, because vagrants, because they are not accountable to their own families, and so they can have orphans, they can produce children, they can have wives, and they can just completely abandon them and move away, which means that a vagrant cannot have a family because the family then becomes the responsibility of the state, right? So what the report says is something very interesting. It says that this act of these people sort of proliferating as disease by being contagious, by setting a bad example, actually you're damaging the national fabric of England because you're actually attacking the family. The report does not say that vagabonds, by moving from place to place, are not adding to the national sort of demand supply chain. But it says you are in fact destroying family values. You're actually destroying family values and family feelings of gratitude, of affection, of responsibility. So it's an interesting argument because this is how the law is arguing. And this is how the law sort of uses the family to pathologize an entire group of population that is not fixed in one place. So the figure of the vagabond here becomes a threat to the family as it functions as an economic unit. So, so 1834 is when this report is written. 1824, let me just find this. 1834, you have the Vagrancy Act, which is an act, again, the same group of population, but in a different act, is punishing idle and disorderly persons, rogues and vagabonds. It not only turned idleness into a crime, but by the time it is amended again 60 years later in 1898, the Vagrancy Act criminalized men who lived off the earnings of prostitution or pimping and who solicited in public places. Look at how a category of persons who may not have had anything to do with sexuality, through this amendment of the act, when you look at the history of law as a history of language, sort of sexuality and vagrancy come together using the unit of family. And this is what Brian Lacey in his book, Terrible Queer Creatures, says, that the Vagrancy Act 1898 prohibited soliciting or importuning for immoral purposes originally intended as a measure against prostitution. In practice, the legislation was almost solely used to convict men for gay sex, just like 377 was used, against all kinds of people. And this is my little historical archive, and here I'm going to be moving to Jack Halberstam, who I'm sure most of you know, a queer theorist. Jack Halberstam, in talking about a strategy of wildness, looks at the figure of the destitute. They borrow from Nikita Sheffert's idea of disobedient children as a model, and I quote, for becoming ungovernable as a proposal for radical praxis. How do we become ungovernable? Yeah, here I want to tell you what identity does. Let me give you a completely different example, again, about the performative nature of why is capitalism, queerness, why am I talking of industrial labor, why are they importantly aligned? I remember many years back, I went into this shop looking for perfume, and as a queer person, I went in, and the shopkeeper very nicely asked me, said, what kind of perfume? Are you looking for perfume for men or for women? And I remember, even though, and this is what I mean by going against common sense, even though I think for most people it's obvious the kind of perfume they want, for me it wasn't. Because for me, that for confused me. Now, who is that for? Is that for the subject? So if I am a woman and I wear a perfume for women, why would men like it? Like, if I am supposed to attract a man, if a man is wearing a men's perfume, what is the logic of this word for men? For men assumes that, I'm a man and I want to attract a woman, but I'm going to wear men's perfume. Like, what is the logic of that subject? Like, the entire subject-object binary gets confused in my head because of that word for men. If it said to attract men, I could say, yes, I'm here to attract men. Or if it said to attract women, I would say, or to attract men, or to attract women, that would be something, right? So capitalism actually assumes that you know who this for is. Who is this for? For women, when you look at a perfume. So my basic arguments against identity is it always creates a new kind of common sense. So when Jack Halberstam actually talks about being ungovernable, becoming ungovernable as a proposal for radical praxis, this is what they mean, in a sense, that how do we become ungovernable? How do we become, in a sense, unpredictable? How do we use the idea of disobedient children as a model for that radical praxis? So part of this becoming ungovernable, therefore, is to identify these strategies of making the self intelligible in some of these predictable ways. This is what I call common sense. So therefore, to return to the Foucauldian idea of friendship as an amorphous political site of unpredictable and multiple intensities, we have so many queer friendships have romance in them, have tenderness, we call our friends mothers. They become models for kinship, for family. Nobody can tell you what friendship is supposed to mean. So for me, this amorphousness, if you remember that first quote by Bell Hooks, let me see. No, not this one. There is. Let me see. Yeah, maybe I'll come back to it. But quickly, this lack of a model this is what Bell Hooks says, the need to invent something. This lack of a model is, in a sense, the hope of queerness. And I'm going to actually end with two quotes from David Halperin. Quote number 7, please. David Halperin, no, not yes. Yes. Queer is by definition whatever is at odds with the normal, the legitimate, the dominant. There is nothing in particular to which it necessarily refers. It is an identity without an essence. Queer then demarcates not a positivity, but a positionality. So think of that slantwise line in relation to the center, the O, okay, that Q in relation to that O. Vis-a-vis the normative, queer describes a horizon of possibility. Yes, something that's constantly moving. If you think of common sense as the center, the horizon is something that's constantly moving, a horizon of possibility whose precise extent and heterogeneous scope cannot in principle be delimited in advance. And I want to end by 3 examples, honestly, of this performative. I don't want to give you answers because I don't have answers, honestly. I want to ask what happens when a noun becomes an adjective, and what happens when an adjective becomes a noun. I don't want to tell you what queerness is. I want to know what queerness does. And I want to sort of, the last quote, please. This is, so I'm looking at 3 examples completely from 3 different ages. One is that example of when the word noun contagion becomes contagious. The second is when the word queer becomes from an adjective becomes a noun, when it starts to define something. It starts by defining itself. And this is from, slide number 8, please. This is a flyer in the New York Gay Pride in 1990. This is, in a sense, excuse me, many people read it as one of the first expressions of queerness in terms of defining a group of people. It says, do we really have to use that word? It's trouble. Every gay person has his or her own take on it. For some, it means strange and eccentric and kind of mysterious. And for others, queer conjures up those awful memories of adolescent suffering. Well, yes, gay is great. It has its own place. But when a lot of lesbians and gay men wake up in the morning, we feel angry and disgusted, not gay. So we've chosen to call ourselves queer. Using queer is a way of reminding us how we are perceived by the rest of the world, unquote. And when we talk about that slantwise position in terms of mainstream culture, of dominant culture, even within LGBTQ, Janet R. Jacobson actually suggests that, and I quote, it's important to complete the Foucauldian move from human being to human doing. What Jacobson means by this is that it may be more productive to think of queer as a verb, a set of actions, rather than as a noun, an identity, or even a nameable positionality formed in and through the practice of particular actions. And this then connects to the earlier essay by Foucault, where Foucault says that homosexuality, he still doesn't use the word queer because it's not in circulation. He says it's a mode of life. It's the way you live. It's a certain way of living. And then finally, the last quote, completely different, in a different era in time, last year, actually, Justice Chandrachud, the last slide, please, slide number 9. This word familial, actually, familial relationships may take the form, many of you may know this, familial relationships may take the form of domestic, unmarried partnerships or queer relationships. These manifestations of love and of families may not be typical, but they are as real as their traditional traditional counterparts. Such atypical manifestations of the family unit are equally deserving not only of protection under the law. Goes on. What is important for me is this word familial. The word family is a noun. You know what family looks like. The moment I say family, you know what it looks like. It's a noun. It evokes an idea. But the moment you say familial, it takes the word forward. It becomes an adjective. It says, it is like family, but it is not necessarily like old families, may take the form of domestic. I love this word form. I think there are many forms of queerness. And I did not want to depoliticize necessarily queerness and its relationship to gender and sexuality. And by reading sort of the history of language alongside the history of law and these performative turns, I wanted to build bridges with historical characters and really think of queerness not as a noun. I don't want to think at the end of the day if I'm queer enough, but really as a form of strangeness, as being, as feeling the need to invent one's own metaphor. And I offer the metaphor of the hinge here to all of you at the end of my talk as a queer metaphor. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Your session was incredibly enlightening, and we would want to thank you for graciously sharing your insightful experience. We're truly grateful, ma'am. I would request Professor Vibhuti Patel to provide her remarks. Over to you, ma'am. Ma'am, you're
Totally fascinated by your exposition. And I think linking it up with the neoliberal logic of current this thing, where as a tokenism, you accept the variety and gender spectrum. But when it comes to the material reality and changing the quality of life of people, the response is the same. I would like to here especially mention the paper by the Harvard scholars during the pandemic, where they had put the onus of spread of COVID on sex workers. What is your take on that?
Very important. If you look at 1834, if you look at the difference between the New Poor Law and the Vagrancy Act in 1898, there is another law that's passed in between, the Contagious Diseases Acts. Initially in England, contagion is not necessarily defined by bodily spread, but in fact, prostitutes become very important figures of defining contagion because of syphilis and because it can be transmitted sexually, transmitted sexually. So absolutely spot on. Actually, it has a lot to do with sex work. And let's look at transgender representation in terms of the popular imagination. A lot of it has to do with the fear of sex work and seeing disease and sex together. So it's very interesting that vagrancy actually starts to be associated with prostitution and pimping and gay sex. Like, how did that happen, right? It also happens with language. If you look at the way that the word contagion sort of moves in 19th century England, it moves very slowly, but it moves by association, through connotation. So yes, absolutely, absolutely.
The same logic get extended to the women in informal sector also. Even if you read the discourses among the abolition of slavery group, all their findings about the condition of, indentured labor in the plantations in Caribbean, or so, all of them are just talking about women as a contaminating influence. They are seeing that human incarnation of lust and just affecting the moral of the whole plantation workers. No? So even those who are well-meaning, even during the pandemic also we saw, among the relief workers also, there was tremendous hesitation among supporting transgender and sex workers. No, only those who were associated with the human rights movement or the health movement or women's movement, they were the only one who were doing it. Otherwise, mainstream organization, they were moved and they wanted to do work with empathy, but not for these people. So the question of morality, and I think you have exposed it so well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now the floor is open for questions from the audience, and I think we have a few in the Q&A box, and we have a few hands raised. So, Hanaji, could you unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Debolina. That was very interesting and very well articulated. Thank you for throwing light on different aspects with regard to this. My question is in connection with language and also the element of voice. Voice. Our voice. Yeah. For example, many times when we speak, people might say that your voice is very motherly. I've heard that. Your voice is very motherly, or for that matter, and it has often made me wonder why. It's not about whether you're a person who sings, you're a person who might be trained that way. But I just remember an instance from my college days, like really long back, where we had a professor who walked into the class, a Hindi professor, and when he started speaking, the voice was very feminine that the entire class laughed. So it's like, I was just wondering, since you are working on language, and I was just interested to know what will be your take on voice, because sometimes when certain people talk, your imagination or the way you associate that person with a certain gender becomes extremely problematic. And I have often found this thing has gotten me wondering so much, like, how can my voice be motherly, or how can it be paternal for that matter? So it would be interesting if you could throw some light on it. Thank you.
So, see, as someone who teaches literature, I mean, when I'm teaching in class, when I'm reading out a play, or I'm always performing, in a sense, what the author, the tone. So that is one way of answering about authorial voice, narratorial voice. There is always a style of speaking, right? So that has to do with reading, that has to do with interpretation. So there are two things that I feel like I hear in your question. I could be completely wrong. One is this matter of style, a way of speaking, a manner of speaking that is evocative. The other is the word motherly, okay, which has to do with psychic roles. Like, I feel like, whenever I meet someone new, I always keep matching them against my familial, like people I know. And that is more psychic. Not to say that, these two are not connected. Like, if you read Virginia Woolf's Orlando, a novel where the voice keeps changing, the beauty of the novel is that the voice keeps moving as the novel progresses. It's not one voice. The gender keeps changing, the voice keeps changing. So that's a very, very interesting experiment with narratorial voice. But it's a great question, I don't know why it's why. And also, I think the third way of looking at it is archetypes, not just prototypes or stereotypes, but archetypes. What are the archetypes of the mother, the archetype of the father? Do we have queer archetypes? Like, I would be interested in creating queer archetypes. So yeah, thank you for that question. I will think more about it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, can I go now? Can I go? I'm really very, very interested to actually share my observation. Thank you, ma'am. It was actually like walking the memory down lane of attending all the queer geography classes and my own subjective position and embodied position of identifying myself in the same way. I still remember that in the particular chapter on friendship and family, Foucault was also talking about the haptics of friendship, like how two bodies gaze each other and how on the basis of the performative utterances that actually leads to a subtle kind of dramaturgy, it ends up into a distinct kind of sexuality and then into friendship. And how, and also like Foucault is also talking about the bisexual dilemma in this friendship and family chapter, where he's saying that two men are outright love with each other, but when it comes on physical performativity, they are kind of reluctant because they are driven by a subtle sense of patriarchal masculinity that they don't want to break. And then interestingly, like when you were giving the adjective or the symbolic adjective of O, I remember that Sarah Ahmed in her famous book Queer Phenomenology is telling that imagine that the world is a O and you are dividing the world on the basis of north-south coordinate. That is the normative world. But when you are seeing the world as a planet, the different kind of topography, the ocean, that makes it a queer world that gives different kinds of shades and diversity. And then, ma'am, I was also linking that way that when you were talking about contagious, Leo Bersani in his book Rectum as Grave is also talking the same thing, that how this rectum is considered as a disgust filth,
Yes.
but
as a grave, the rectum as a grave, yes.
Yeah, rectum as a grave, but he is also saying that it is only as the rectum and the performative rectum role where gays or bisexuals are breaking the patriarchal doxa. Like that way, they are actually creating the rectum as a erotogenic way. And ma'am, when you were talking that the perfume wala example, where you are saying that it is actually exclusively mean for men, but don't you actually feel that the way the whole concept of men itself is very, very problematical because they are not defining what male? Is it cis? Is it queer? Is it gay? Is it bisexual? Is it asexual? And ma'am, then when you are actually talking about the subjective position, like you were saying that what it is for, whom it is for. So ma'am, don't you think that it can be actually interrelated with Butler's epistemology, in which Butler, in her new book Sense and Perception, is problematizing this Cartesian res exenstra? I think it is actually a way where, with our continuous way of human doing, we are creating our own subject, we are creating our own object, and we are creating our own living embodied existence. So, ma'am, I was actually very, very eager to share my observation.
Thank you
also.
so much, Victor. I've heard your questions on other panels also, and I just think they're excellent. This is not necessarily the direction in which I think, and this is one of the most rewarding, I think, parts of being on a queer panel with other younger people, older people, is that you get to think in directions that you didn't. I have to say I did not connect so much, but I was working with a really small frame because, 25 minutes. But thank you for all of those extremely like swirling ideas all together. There is something else by Leo Bersani that, yeah, I think Leo Bersani is maybe, but yeah, this definitely makes me think in new directions. Thank you, Victor, for that extremely rich feedback.
We'll move ahead. Professor Patel?
Yeah, she's there, no? Dr. Anna Varghese?
She's asked a question, right? Ramji? Oh, I think we have. Yeah.
Manisha,
Manisha. If you could unmute yourself.
Yes, I can see the question. Hello, ma'am. Thank you for such a wonderful session. Wanted to know your insight on recent remark made by Ministry of Women and Child Development concerning SC hearing on same-sex marriage. The remark was, Gender can be fluid but the idea of mother cannot be. Okay, I was not aware of this remark. Can we interpret it as how the idea of family is oppressive in nature at times? Absolutely. I think all of these categories, in fact, what queerness does is it opens up these nouns and it puts them under sort of a microscope and says, what is it made of? What are men made of? What are women made of? What is the nature of the composition, both psychically and as ideas? So I totally agree. If I did not know that this was made, if gender can be fluid by the idea of mother cannot be, that's absolutely completely oppressive, because I know of so many kinship structures where trans people sort of play the role of mothers, are mothers, and very, very this is not a remark of absolutely. I think, in fact, my favorite part of being queer is that it introduces the spectrum. It introduces, you can be from 0 to 100 anywhere on that spectrum, or 0 to 500, 0 to 1000. It is that idea of fluidity that it introduces, which is a problem, actually. And this is the problem of calling it same-sex marriage. And this is why people like bell hooks, people like Foucault, after a point of time, don't necessarily want to align with the same-sex argument because of this fluidness. It is the fluidity that is an excess. And this is what Foucault also says, that, it is not, the problem is not that people can't imagine people of the same sex having like a sexual intercourse. That is not the problem. The problem is the mode of life. The problem is these multiple emotional intensities that cannot necessarily be boxed or cannot necessarily be labeled. And I feel like the full potential of queerness is in opening up these categories that have long belonged, assumed to belong to a particular gender, to a particular kind of body. Absolutely.
Could you unmute yourself?
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much, ma'am, for that very insightful presentation. My question is that if you're aware of the debates around transgenderism, particularly in America, UK, and now Australia is also catching up with it, that this person, Matt Walsh, he came up with his movie, his documentary, What is a Woman? And actually it has been unsettling. Yes, ma'am.
I haven't seen it, but please go ahead.
Yeah, so it's him saying that it's this kind of very empirical approach that he's taking towards the biological aspect of sex. And he says, just like all the other conservatives are saying, that you cannot deny the fact, the truth, the logic behind sex being the determinant behind the behind the gender roles that we are trying to say are fluid. So he says that it is ingrained in your bones, in your chromosomes, and you can find out who is a woman and who is a man. So because of all that, what do you think the impact of all of that, because it's readily available on social media, what can be the impact of all that for queer politics on countries like India, where the social media consumption is quite high? And when I see the comments on it, they just give me a picture that people are regressing backwards.
I completely don't agree with this kind of reading and this kind of very turfy reading of transgender bodies or women having to menstruate, and that the essence of women is in menstruating bodies. I completely do not agree. But actually, trans is queer. Right now, trans is the category over which these battles are being fought. And I feel like if we have said that, if we have allowed, if we have fought for a certain kind of freedom about our bodies, about ourselves, I don't see the point in taking 5 steps back. I mean, see, there are also many kind of trans experiences. I mean, I remember last week, I think this friend of mine shared a trans video from Canada. I'll tell you what it's called. And it's called Trans Man Who Says He Regrets His Transition, says medically transitioning, and he regrets his medical transitioning. And that's one way of being trans. Why do we need to come to a general conclusion about anything? The point of being the queer umbrella is that there are multiplicities. There are different ways of being trans. If there is one sort of the problem is when straight people start deciding on what trans has to be. That I find absurd. Why do straight people need to decide what the trans experience needs to be? That's one experience of it. Is yes. Even in that film by called Chitrangada by Rituparna Ghosh, by the end of the film sort of suggests that that transitioning was not necessarily the desirable outcome. But that is again one experience of transness. The whole point of transness and non-binariness is there are many ways to be, and that the truth of the self is not necessarily in the body, and equally that the truth of the self is in the body. I feel a deep unease in the fact that that I have a woman's body and I feel dysphoria, I feel disconnected, I feel dis-ease in this body, and I want to change it. I don't see what the problem is, and I feel like all of these voices should exist, but where I want to put my weight behind is trans reservation, and I learn a lot from following the debates on trans reservation and hearing Grace Banu talk about a reservation for trans people. And I just feel like there are many ways to be trans, dysphoria is definitely one of it, but non-binariness is also one of it. The problem is the moment we hear the word trans, there is also transphobia, right? There is also shirking away from the label of trans. So I totally feel like I want to hear the entire spectrum of transness and learn from it, rather than feeling the need to have an opinion on other people's experience of their own bodies and gender and sexuality. I just feel like that defeats the purpose.
Thank you, ma'am.
So I think we'll be moving forward. Thanks a lot, ma'am, for such an enriching session. And if the participants have any further questions, write the question in the Q&A box, and I hope ma'am can answer them. So yes, moving forward. I will now request Dr. Devashish Maitwaji to take the session forward. Dr. Mitra is Assistant Professor, Faculty of Liberal Arts, the ICFAI University, Tripura. Dr. Mitra will be talking about unlearning gender, masculinities, and queer space in India and beyond. Over to you, sir.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I extend my heartfelt thanks to all the panelists and Vibhuti, Pam, and each and everyone who are directly or indirectly part of this IMPRI Beyond Binaries project. I am Dr. Devashish Mitra. I am currently an assistant professor in English in the Faculty of Liberal Arts, IMPRI University, Tripura. Now, a lot of things have been already discussed regarding queerness or queer identity. So I would like to shift more my focus on masculinity, because masculinity has become an interdisciplinary field of study. Maybe around 20 years it has taken to grow up. Now, as you see the title, Unlearning Gender, Masculinities and Queer Space in India and Beyond, basically, let me tell the uh, the outline of my talk would be more on the conceptual ideas regarding masculinity and some basic what are the theoretical grounds on which masculinity can be theorized, because it has come into existence now, though it has a direct or indirect linkages with queer studies. Now, next slide, please. Now, as you can see in the slide, I deliberately made this background picture. Now, in many universities, we see, if not the syllabus, full-fledged paper on masculinity studies, but still we can see some extra extracts or excerpts from masculinity studies, and many courses are there on LGBTQIA+. And masculinity studies is not meant to be counter to feminism, as many of us are in the habit of seeing masculinity as a sort of counter to feminism, but it is essentially feminist in nature. Now, it is actually a new way of looking at how masculinities are getting manufactured. Now, whenever we think about gender, can I have the next slide? Yeah, thank you. Now, in this slide, whenever we talk about gender studies, we always have this lip service. Sex is biological and gender is social. But, even after 30 years of Gender Trouble by Judith Butler, we still, somehow continue these, we can say, intentional fallacy by the second wave feminists that sex is biological, but actually there is no difference between sex and gender at all, right? And sex is also a social construct as gender, right? Now, keeping this point in mind, let us see the different models of masculinity from ancient and modern systems of knowledge. Now, if we look at the some gender models I have mentioned here, like hoplite Kinaidos binary, Eromenos, Erastus, pederasty, these are the gender models. Hoplite refers to the Greek foot soldiers, and Kinaidos is considered to be the soft men. Within homosexual coupling, these are sort of queer models, we can say. At that time, queer was not it was not in vogue at that time. Then quickly, if we see Ardhanariswar, masculine, feminine, or Arjun as Brihannala, or Bhishma's lifelong celibacy, these models do not, necessarily refer to our straight sexuality or straight gender by and large. Now, in the early medieval age, if a male is to invoke God or Almighty, then it is said in tantric philosophy, that a male has to invoke the inner femininity to be in union with the Almighty. So, these are the ideas that are very much linked within the frame of masculinity itself. Now, if we go forward, Padma Puran, in the episode of Padma Puran, we see a kind of non-heterosexual encounter between Lord Krishna and Arjun, where actually Krishna addresses Arjun as Arjuni. In that episode, Arjun wants to see Lord Krishna as naked for being very passionate devotee to Lord Krishna. And ultimately, Krishna agrees on this fact, and they had the queer encounter, so to say. And now, on the other hand, in USA, there are this is a very quick, swift historical outline of queer journey, you can say. In the USA, you can see Mattachine Society or Daughter of Binaries. This is how the journey of homosexuality arose. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah. Now, this diagram completely, shows the journey of gay and lesbian groups in America completely. Due to paucity of time, I made the long history within one diagram so that it would be interesting. Now, first, it began with liberation politics. There was, as I mentioned, that that Mattachine Society was for gay men and very strictly for gay men, and the Daughter of Binaries was very strictly for lesbian activists. They were only for the universal, they wanted to change their sex gender divide, but slowly but steadily they started shifting into their ethnic model of identity. They started building communities. Yeah, and their shift from universal to specific, universal to separatist narratives is not a victory to their campaign, not victory to their groups as they used to think. Rather, it is a surrender to the politics. It is a capitulation to the politics. So this is how the identity politics of homosexuality, if I generalize gay and lesbian into one term, so it is the surrender to the gender order, so to say. Next slide, please. Now here comes the groundwork of masculinity studies, as I quickly just mentioned before, that masculinity studies is not meant to be the counter discourse to feminism. Rather, it is an extended version of feminism, and it is not limited to examine only the cis men, neither cis women. It includes all. I request all of us not to be confused with the term masculinity in masculinity studies. Masculinity studies as an interdisciplinary field of inquiry encompasses all kinds of genders within it. Now, as I mentioned that, sex gender problem that we have seen previous hermeneutics of feminism regarding, they talked about biological sex, chromosomal sex, sex gender divide. At that time, these are the burgeoning topics, and they used to believe, they were of the opinion that only heterosexual women are the fit subjects for feminism. But after second wave feminism, a lot of things changed, but we somehow continue the hermeneutics of second wave feminism. We should be aware of it. Now, this study, it does not merely depend on the body that has a male genital. We always I think one of the sessions was talking about that sex is fluid, but gender is not fluid. That idea can also be problematized. Gender can also be considered as a fluid identity, like sexuality, because the point is that here the sexual organ is not male, neither female. It is just an organ where out of which sperm comes out or urine comes out. Uh, the organ is how we read it. It is the gendered way of reading the organ. So this is how we regard the organ is become, it has, that becomes the problem here. So male genitalia or female genitalia for that matter does not have any fixed sex, because what is fixed in our body, in our world we see a lot of pacemaker is can be inserted, kidney transplant can happen, many things can happen within our body. So what is that makes our body stable? Yeah, and the male body acquires a kind of foundationalist value, which patriarchy always valorizes. And that idea, can be understood from a binary of stability, instability. As I mentioned, that nothing can be stable. Everything is unstable most of the times. Now, so masculinity can, it can be, it looks like a floating signifier. It can be put up anywhere you like. So this is the idea, these are some basic grounds on which masculinity can be theorized. Next slide, please. Yeah. Now, let us move on to R.W. Connell's view of masculinity. It was published in 1995. Connell and Mrs. Smith made a survey in Australian schools, and she was one of the proponents of masculinity studies movement, and she made this theory of masculinity: hegemonic, complicit, subordinate, and marginalized. Now, number one is hegemonic masculinity. By hegemonic masculinity, she refers to a number of individuals who were at the power position. But this power position is subject to change over time, over context, over space. Here, I may appear to be hegemonic for some minutes. I may not remain hegemonic after some minutes. So, hegemonic position is subject to change. Maybe here I am hegemonic. I will become subordinate to my boss. I will become hegemonic to my students. Okay. Now, then the second one is complicit masculinity. Now, complicit masculinity includes the enormous amount of people. The majority of men is included in this group. It's like somebody who doesn't have a six-pack abs, but somebody supports it. Okay, like the horrible movie Kabir Singh.
Kabir Singh.
Yeah. Okay. So this idea, we do not. Somebody doesn't have that body, that curved, highly defined physique, but still we support it, and that includes many of us. Majority of men are within this group. Then the subordinate masculinity it refers to those groups who either are subordinated to the hegemonic members or the KMN. Last one is the marginalized masculinity. It refers to those group of people who are racially subjugated to the hegemonic people. If due to your race, you are not able to speak out your sexuality, like black masculinity, they are not, allowed to speak about their own homosexuality. So this is the theory of Connell's masculinity, which can be very useful to understand the journey of a boy to become a man. As Vibhuti ma'am said in one of the sessions, that as Beauvoir says, one is not born woman, rather becomes one. Similarly, one is not born man, rather becomes man. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah. Now, this book helped us a lot to understand the complex experience, very much psychic experience to be precise, In this book, Sedgwick, what she seems to be saying is that uh, when you are in the closet, nobody knows. But when you say you have come out of it, so coming out of the closet brings the closet into existence. Second point is that closet gives you, closet forcibly determines different ways of not saying things. You are not allowed to say this, you are not allowed to say that. So you are using your silence as a very active tool, not to say this, not to say that. So here silence plays a very, active role, in crime studies. We talk about silent murder and loud silence. Yeah, so that's the idea can be reflected in this, complex closet experience. Next slide, please. Now, uh, not only straight, any gender can be toxic. To justify this statement, I have made a paper and I have shown a essay by Susan Stryker, My Words to Victor Frankenstein, about the village of Chamonix. Actually, this essay was not published before because this essay didn't look like academic paper, but it was rejected by many publishers. Later on, it was published in GLQ, Deep University Press, 1994. Here, Susan appeared as a trans lesbian body. First, she was male. Then he went through surgical reassignment surgery, sex reassignment surgery, and he becomes woman. Now she thinks about her body as lesbian body. But when she goes to the mainstream lesbian community, the mainstream lesbian community neglected her body. They are of the opinion you are not a born woman, so you cannot be allowed into our group. So not only straight or heterosexual, but any gender can be toxic. As long as gender becomes prescriptive, any gender can be toxic. So we can see the patriarchal underplay, within apparently all inclusive lesbian activism. So, and there you already understood that the kind of deceptive inclusivity that is there. Next slide, please. Now, moving to Indian masculinity, we can see nowadays metrosexuality was in the air. It's a big question. I have made this term from reading of Mangesh Kulkarni's essays, Mutant Masculinities, if I'm not mistaken. He questioned this: is metrosexuality an Indian reality, or is it a westernized version of metrosexuality? Who is very much keen to, personal grooming, who is very much associated with industry, fashion industries and all. What kind of construction of sexuality is this? So it becomes a controversy that is it really a sexuality of Indian nature or not? And there are many other organizations. They also, started talking about masculinity in change. And in Indian movies, Hollywood, no, I haven't mentioned the Hollywood, just mentioned the Bollywood and one or two Bengali movies here. As you see, Dosti, Sangam, Fire, Dostana, Memories in March, Aligarh, Nagar Kirtan is in Bengali. It has got National Film Award also. एक लड़की को देखा तो ऐसा लगा, शुभ मंगल ज्यादा सावधान. So some movies are really of commendability, but if I take up some like Dostana or Shubh Mangal Jada Sabdhan, in those movies, if we see some gestures like fist bumping or high-fiving, patting back, these are the expressions of, these are actually performative tropes of certain heteromasculine, stereotype. So that actually revolves around men, group of boys. Next slide, please. Now, 2020, George Floyd protests actually made these headlines very much popular. Black Lives Matter to all Black Lives Matter. And here, at that particular time, a lot of, queer, trans, Black Lives Matter, but they were not of the front page. So the idea was that Black Lives Matter, but is it Black heterosexual lives that mattered? But there was another, lives in the margin that also, come into the matter. So that's the point that we need to keep. That will make our idea inclusive. Next slide, please. Now, if we look at masculinity from a contemporary perspective here, so I have done my PhD also on Black masculinity. And so here we can see white masculinity studies and post-colonial masculinity studies. There is a huge difference. Lot of research, a lot of article, lot of movies, everything are very popular under white masculinity studies. But if we look at post-colonial masculinity studies, or at least Black masculinity studies, uh, there is not much proliferation, not so much efflorations. So that makes masculinity studies. There is another book also you can see in the footnote, that post-colonial masculinity. It was recently published 2019 by Routledge, that mainly talks about the post-colonial masculinity, how Oriental and Occidental binary constructs the post-colonial body, post-colonial male body to be precise, and how it understands the valorization of the white skin, on the other hand, exoticization of the other. So these are, new avenues, new arenas of understanding masculinity. Yes, can we have the next slide, please? A lot of things have been discussed, so I don't think I should repeat again, but I may touch upon some ideas like, queer, though some points which are not covered, that I would like to cover quickly. Like queer is not necessarily a confrontational resistance. It is like queer is a very subversive kind of resistance. As Debolina ma'am was very rightly talking about slantwise, it's like this. It is oblique, or it is if we know the etymological meaning of the word queer, it means athwart, which is which is not, it is neither like this, neither like this. It is completely at a slant position. Okay, in Hindi it is tedha, and it never sidha. Okay, so now, another point is that when the most crucial queer politics comes into play, when repetition becomes a criticism, not a support. I am mimicking you, not giving tribute to your identity, but making fun of your identity. So that is the kind of performance that queer politics follow or should follow. Queer disallows disciplining of bodies, as is happening currently. Yeah, how queer bodies are getting disciplined, how they are gentrified, how they are respectable. They should, how much we can make them look respectable to be acceptable in society. And queer disregards respectability of the body. They are only for multiplicity of amorphous identities. Yeah, and last of all, I must give this statement that queer is a politics. Queer is not always associated with sexuality all the time. Something that you go against normative discourse of gender or anything. it can be queer. Now, the last of all, I would like to make a statement that yes, we should celebrate that government are giving grants to LGBTQ people in some way or other, but we should be cautious of being categorized into the trap of being categorized as labels or as marked bodies. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, these are some reading materials for the participants that can be useful. Those of you who are interested in masculinity studies research projects or PhDs, definitely these books can be useful. So I really extend my heartfelt thanks that you invited me to give this rather wonderful platform to talk on these issues. And thank you so much.
We humbly express our appreciation for your presence, time, and words, sir. We are truly grateful to have you here. I would request Professor Vibhuti Patel to provide her remarks. Over to you.
Dr. Debashis Mitra, it is always very interesting to listen to you. This is the second time I heard you at a Tezpur University. Most of the masculine studies people, they are very inaccessible. They are on defensive, and I've seen enough of it in Mumbai and Pune. And first time, like, you meet a person who talks in a persuasive style, that itself is very important for the people who are new to the discipline, who are new to the language. My one question, I see that when you meet so many people in person, they are gender queer, they are open, but when it comes to the public image or using their power to reach out, they trivialize this thing. And Bollywood is an classic example. Bollywood has so many people who informally they are queer, but when it comes to portrayal of queer person or a person who is beyond the heteronormativity, there is a massive trivialization, marginalization, creation of a comic culture, and many times they also ask the queer people to portray that role. No, how do you explain this contradiction? No?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, it always happens. Like it can be understood if we look at the matrix of closet experience. Yeah. And some people are, some people suffer from this kind of suffocation or subjugation, you can say. But I am happy to share that what the novels that I have worked on, some of the novels, in those novels I have seen those actually those novels are written by Eileen Harris. He was Afro-American openly gay novelist in 1990s USA. So most of his characters are closeted characters, but they what I have seen in them, they apply an aspect of passing, quote unquote, passing. Passing in and out of the heterosexual world. When they are within their, comfort zone, they pass in. They pass into their, homosexual or closet intimacies. But whenever they say some kind of invigilation or surveillance, they are very quick. They are very consummate at changing their identities. So passing becomes a kind of queer politics that can be very subversive to the dominant gender order, that is heterosexual.
How would you see Karan Johar phenomenon?
Actually, it is difficult to give any terminology to his identity. Maybe he is closeted, or maybe sometimes through his poking fun. We try to smell out what kind of identity he loves to thrive in. So it can be understood like Karan Johar's identity can be summed up as metrosexual to a large extent.
Yeah, but because going out of his way to poke fun at queer. Okay,
Yes.
you can have a situational humor, you can laugh at yourself. That's the best way, no, to do that. Why would he go out of his way to trivialize the queer experience? No, that is the very marked feature of his Bollywood film. There are so many blockbusters, no, by
Yes,
Khans
yes.
and all. They show macho image, they show this thing, but at least they don't go to this extent of completely.
Yes.
You know, yeah.
Yes. That goes against respectability, because
correct. That's what
yes,
I was
that
going
is
to
good.
talk about, the respectability. Yes.
Yes.
You use the right word. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Now the floor is open for questions from the audience.
Please unmute yourself and speak. Yeah. I think I don't see raised hands.
Yes, please raise your hands or type it out. Yeah.
Yeah, like you were talking about the example of Eileen Harris, because I have read Eileen Harris' work just for the research purpose of my bisexuality. Like I was doing my research on how closeted bisexual men basically feel different kind of suffocations, and how the constitutive act of passing actually erases their identity. But I will say that the problem with Eileen Harris' novel is that he is playing a safe game of fluidity, because if if he's actually portraying the character of bisexual, he's saying that bisexuality is not a valid phase. It is actually in a passing phase that will settle with someone else or with some another else. So that way, I find that most of his novel does not find the bisexual topology in a proper manner. And the problem with the Bollywood representation that Vibhuti ma'am was actually speaking eloquently is that like even though section 377 has been revoked, but the deep-seated stigma, the deep-seated erosions of the queer value, and the rampant denigration when it is being faced in their own life, it becomes very, very difficult to break the boundary or break the door of the closet. Because what Sarah Ahmed or say Judith Butler or Michel Foucault is talking about, the importance of the lived experience in the sense that how all this lived experience are collated together into a common semblance of embodied phenomena that joins or that conjoin the shared pain that fights against the different kinds of the oppressive forces. So even in that Bollywood, like 100%, I will say that 95% of the actors are closeted bisexual men. But you know that when you are being settled with a opposite sex out of the choice, and it is very, very difficult to navigate the patriarchal toxicity also, because you have to be in a system, you have to actually live in that particular system, yet you can queer it on and off. So that was, I was actually thinking in the same way. So yeah.
Thank you so much for this info.
Yes, it's very robust analysis. Victor G has provided is very important. Yeah.
I think we should move ahead and
chat.
If there are any questions, please answer them in the Q&A box. We're really grateful.
Thank you.
Could do that. We really appreciate the opportunity to have you as our guest, sir. I sincerely appreciate it, and yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now I would request Dr. Lavanya Shanmugh Garvinji to take the session forward. Dr. is an assistant professor, Center for Disasters and Development, Jamshedji Tata School of Disaster Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, TIS, Mumbai. Dr. Arvind will be talking about towards inclusivity in disaster management, reflections on challenges faced by LGBTQ plus communities in disaster situations. Over to you.
Very good evening. Thank you to the Impact Policy Research Institute. Thank you to Professor Vibhuti Patel for having me as an invitee, Dr. Arjun Kumar, and thank you, Samriddhi, for the introduction. I hope I can share my screen. Just give me a second. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah,
yes.
you are.
Some disturbance is coming from behind.
From behind? Yes, let me just give me a second. Right. All right, so let me just get started with
It is in working mode. Make it slideshow mode.
Yes.
Fine.
Yes.
Fine.
is it okay now? I've made it
Yes.
slide. Yes.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Just I'm going to be talking about queer inclusivity in disaster management and primarily showcase some of the challenges faced by queer communities in conflict and disaster situations, primarily disaster situations, but also briefly in conflict situations. I teach in the School of Disaster Studies at Tata Institute of Social Sciences. And one of the things as I was putting this lecture together, and this is an area I'm deeply interested in, there's a major lacuna in documenting the experiences of the queer communities in disaster situations. And so I will just take you through the experiences that have been documented and also speak about the need for such documentation. The disaster management or conflict as disciplinary orientations are deeply dependent on state response. For any kind of a disaster event, the state is a major responder. And we know about the queer communities' encounters with the state have been through resistance and have been through making claims on the state. So it's a very complex relation because the state being the major responder has always there have been sites of injustice and oppression towards queer communities. So the relationship is fairly complex. So what I'm going to be doing in this short presentation of mine in the short session is first to introduce you to the idea of disasters and conflict and locate queer identities in such contexts and look at the challenges faced and what can we do to bring about an inclusive environment for queer communities in disaster management. So there are a range of issues, queer communities not being a homogeneous group, but the heterogeneity across gender identity and across sexual orientation, the heterogeneity of and diversity of experiences and subjugations So the claims that you can make on the state are fairly varied, and state responses haven't really been very encouraging. So the idea is to improve the documentation and generate empirical evidence to push for positive policy changes. It's not merely enough to decriminalize, but go beyond the binary of criminal and citizen, and look at particular experiences. So firstly, I want to begin with the idea of what is a disaster, because when you're locating it, the particular experiences of vulnerability within a disaster context, one must understand at first what a disaster really is. So we do talk about events such as an earthquake or a landslide or flooding or avalanches or and so on. But definitionally, we want to talk about disasters, any kind of a catastrophe, a mishap, or a calamity. It causes bodily injury, property damage, this exceptional human suffering, and of a great magnitude. And it is beyond the coping capacity of the community, right? So the community, whichever this community is, will not be able to cope with the impacts of the event based on their existing capacity, their existing resources, their existing abilities. So they require external help. This is true for every community, but already marginalized communities, or communities that require assistance on a daily basis, require recognition on a daily basis, the disaster impacts are amplified and magnified when it comes to these communities. Another sort of aspect is that we're in the era of the Anthropocene, geological era, where human activities on the environment has caused grave change in climatic patterns, and the human climate relationships have been going through a lot of change and bringing about increased frequency and intensity of natural hazard events. So in such an era where there is already so much grievous calamity and catastrophe all around us, both man-made or the human-made as well as natural, they don't affect all communities equally. And this is one of the aspects of what we have to kind of understand, is that the impacts of conflict, of war, or any kind of aggressive action, any kind of hostility, any kind of dispute, which has profound impact in social, economic, political aspects of life, or any kind of a calamity that brings about, that wipes out, say, livelihoods as we know it, or that wipes out assets that communities own, or that wipes out any kind of savings or any kind of resource that is already so hard to get. The most vulnerable are the ones who are already most marginalized, and this is where one must locate the queer groups. So disaster management as a discipline has undergone paradigm shifts. Earlier, disasters were conceptualized as event-centric, unidimensional, natural phenomena. So you're only concerned about the natural environment. So one would be talking about wind conditions and low pressure belts and fault lines and ruptures. However, the social science and the anthropological disciplines have challenged the natural science conceptions of disasters, and says that one must locate the local cultural context and histories of people experiencing the disasters, which is where, in the context of LGBTQI plus communities face a range of oppressions. You must have seen over the last 5 days the kind of subjugations and oppressions the communities face, and these get magnified and amplified in disaster context. So we must look at the social, physical, economic, and political environment particularly in a disaster situation. And it's very, because the queer groups are exceptionally diverse, and it's a heterogeneous and experience. You cannot homogenize the queer community, that one must look at the daily sociality, the proximity to physical hazards, the state-citizen relationships, which is already very complex. How do they play out in a disaster situation? Yes, so we want to say that, want to begin by saying that disaster and conflict are not experienced equally by different social groups. Each social groups experience it differentially, and there is differential vulnerability at play. And so impacts are not evenly distributed, and therefore vulnerability and resilience are very varied. Right, so I'll give you all examples as we move along, but primarily one must understand that there's a great myth that disasters is a great equalizer, that everybody is affected by the disaster events. The point is, even something like a pandemic, we saw who were the groups that were the most affected, and which groups are somewhat insulated from the ill effects of calamities. So one must look at the social orientation and social locations of various groups. So disaster research demonstrates that gender, ethnicity, race, class, income, disability, and all of this, if it cross-cuts with other identities such as queerness and the spectrum of identities across the gender spectrum, you can see that the impacts are very, very different. So we can look at it in terms of how the intensity of disaster impacts on queer lives is amplified. For example, even the sense of home, or the sense of place, because when a disaster event wipes out housing, and housing is very difficult to set up for communities that are economically vulnerable because of social factors. And it's very difficult for non-binary people, even today, non-binary identities, to find good jobs. And so accessing housing has been exceptionally difficult, and primarily done through existing social networks. So when a house is wiped out, washed away in the floods, or devastated in an earthquake, or is crushed under a landslide, the recovery and the reconstruction is an exceptional burden on queer groups. And sites of social, the entire owing to the operation of various kinds of stigma, the social networks which queer communities depend on, they get disrupted during disaster events. So I just want to take you through the disaster management cycle. So there are several aspects. So at each aspect, there are problems very particular to LGBTQI plus community. So whether if you were to look at the response phase, public information or evacuations, we find that a lot of queer groups get left behind, and they're not evacuated in time because of social stigma, and because resettling them in shelter homes, because shelter homes, there's a very binary policy making. I mean, there are male shelters and there are female shelters and there are family shelters. So if there are non-binary identities, they might not fit into any of these three categories. And so they don't get evacuated, and therefore they don't get resettled, and there is no housing provided. They lose medical support, because if somebody is going through hormone replacement therapy or any kind of medical support, and if the medical infrastructure is destroyed in a disaster, the priority is not to restore medical supplies or medical infrastructure particular to the queer community, but the relief and the public health measures are channelized towards binary populations and normative, heteronormative familial groups. So in the immediate response stage itself, there is a major gap in how response to queer groups take place. And even registration and tracing, for example, because many of the non-binary population, they do not have documentation in their name. So because of lack of documentation in ID cards and so much of the environment is very disrupted, lack of documentation, they find that they're not there in beneficiary lists. So this is for every stage. So in the response stage, these are some of the issues faced. In the mitigation stage, there is again no legislation, no policy, no, not even a guideline on how queer groups, how one can mitigate risks pertaining particularly to LGBTQI groups. And all the mitigation measures are through a very heteronormative, heteropatriarchal lens. The decision making is very binary, looks at identities through a binary lens. So there are the NDMA guidelines. NDMA is the National Disaster Management Authority. They have guidelines for gender. So they do talk about men and women and children, but there is very little or absolutely no guideline issue to talk about transgender groups, intersex groups, or queer communities. So there is no policy, no legislation that is protecting these identities. Again, in preparedness, there is hardly any preparedness aimed particularly, like an evacuation plan or a warning system will not cater to the specific needs and demands of the queer groups. And recovery, again, is exceptionally binary in terms of reconstruction assistance, financial assistance, because it's always assumed the whole breadwinner bias and the head of the family bias, and those biases come into play. And there is and even something like a restoration of public assets, the asset ownership is so low among queer groups that once they lose the asset, it's very difficult to kind of reconstruct and build the asset. So across the disaster management cycle, the problems are exceptional and very, very difficult to resolve in the lack of almost a policy vacuum. There's a policy vacuum and an environment that is apathetic to queer realities. So this is the environment, and as I started off by saying, disaster management is exceptionally dependent on state response, and the queer identities relationship with the state has been one of resistance and complexity, that making demands on the state is very difficult, but there are groups doing what they are doing, and in this field there's very little documentation. So there is a vacuum in disaster management policies and research, and there's hardly, as I said, hardly any scholarly discussion. The LGBTQ people's experiences are heightened during disasters because existing inequalities are magnified and amplified. The third question is what I already spoke about, whether it's not just that because we are in a quote unquote developing country that the queer communities here face this problem. It's a global problem, even in the global north or the so-called global north. I'll give you examples from Hurricane Katrina, which hit New Orleans in 2008. So it's global. So across the Americas and Europe, it's a very routinely discriminatory and potentially violent forms of treating the queer groups. So the home, especially the house. So let me take you through different aspects. The rescue, relief, resettlement are all exceptionally heteronormative in nature, owing to binary policies. In many societies, FBO stands for faith-based organizations, whether it's your churches or your temple trusts or your the mosques or your Sikh, the Langars, and also the FBOs, which is your faith-based organizations, often are an important responder in a community. And studies done by the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission states that the research shows that FBOs or faith-based organizations usually do not provide relief support to the queer community because there is a stigma around sin and so on. So they also go as far to say that these communities are the one that have caused the disaster owing to sexual transgressions, right? So there is a lot of cultural baggage to this group. The other aspects which we also spoke about earlier is the heteronormative bias, because the way governments look at beneficiaries, the way governments look at families, and the way even NGOs look at families, it's a very normative lens of an opposite sex couple and their biological children. So those in same-sex relationship are hardly considered a family or a couple, and they are routinely excluded from any kind of support. So meanwhile, a transgender and intersex person, because of their gender identity, have exceptional difficulties. I spoke about the evacuation shelters, where the shelters are either for men or for women or for families, and these identities just do not get shelters in the hardest of times. And so this is the problem immediately after the disaster, which is the rescue, relief, and resettlement processes. And the housing, I spoke about this, but I'll give you all some examples. Housing has been exceptionally difficult. As you may know, housing is very difficult to even access. So many of these identities live outside the family home and have created their own support systems and their own support infrastructure. And so natural disasters, they destroy these buildings and these dwellings and the neighborhood structures and various physical and community facilities that the LGBT groups have put together with great difficulty. So as I said, it's not just linked to the global, it's not just a global South issue, but it's across the world. So this is this one is in Haiti, but Katrina also, we saw a lot of such similar problems. The European heat wave in 2008, again 2020, again saw elderly lesbian women were the ones who were most affected because they were energy poor with least access to air conditioning and other kind of energy sources. Yes, private spaces, which are important for well-being, and service spaces for HIV/AIDS, people living with HIV/AIDS. So all the physical, emotional, and sites that have been lovingly created by the LGBTQ communities all get destroyed in the natural disasters, and there is a complete policy vacuum on reconstructing and redeveloping these sites, which queer groups are then called queer domicide. You know, the death or the systematic destruction of queer sites. This is one reading that I have shared on queer domicide, so you can go back and look at this term. Discriminatory practices in New Orleans, which is the site of the Hurricane Katrina in the US. There was so much marginalization, and the churches blame them for causing anything that goes wrong. There's an earthquake or there's a flooding, and the churches blame the queer identities for causing these problems, and there are accusatory sermons, and there are assaults, and there's a lot of gender-based violence that takes place in rescue and relief shelters and homes, and the idea of corrective rape. And there's lots of reports from the global north on bisexual men who have been forced into sexual relations to pay for food or just for money. So so as I said, this is a universal problem, but the magnitude varies. So coming to some South Asian examples, in India, the Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004, the Aravanis of Tamil Nadu, they are a non-binary group. So it's a very localized kind of sexual and gender identity. And one cannot really put them into any label. So it's a very localized, very self-defining kind of identity are the Aravanis. Similarly, the warriors in Central Java and the Baklas in Philippines, they have all, they survive by begging or dancing or singing and performing street art, and that's how they generally live. Now, these groups in the Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004, they were denied shelter and aid because documents, lack of identity documents, which are very binary in nature. In 2004, even more so, and routinely excluded from domestic and international aid. And there was a lot of physical and sexual abuse. And many of these policy guidelines listed evacuees as women or men or boys or girls. So again, the very binary gender identities, and accommodation is a massive sort of problem. So some of the issues that were faced is in terms of ration and food security, loss of livelihood and income, housing and shelter, healthcare, especially those who are going through hormonal replacement therapy or any other kinds of medical that require daily or routine medical care. The medical infrastructure is entirely disrupted in disaster context, and there is all the medical services are channelized to the general population. So there is a massive problem, and the policy making is, the law is heteronormative, the policy making is binary, and the everyday, the pre-existing, pre-disaster, pre-conflict, pre-existing social relations and stigma, and the everyday sociality of abuse creates a very reluctant approach, relief approach, and they ignore routinely ignore the queer realities, and the entire policy is very heteronormative, and there is an invisibilization of queer and trans and intersex identities and needs. Because of the way families have been defined, but there is still a lacuna in research, and there's just a lot of qualitative narratives and coming from queer spaces which are trying to document it, but enough, disaster management itself is quite a new and a nascent discipline, and within that the LGBT identities are another further marginalized in the discipline. So it's still very nascent, and we have a very, very long way to go. And historically there are lots of research projects on experiences of queer identities during the war. So this is a movie, perhaps you could watch it at some point. It's available easily, Coming Out Under the Fire, the history of homosexual couples during the World War II. And this documents the ways in which constricted identities who joined the armed forces, they had to hide their identity and hide their reality to continue serving in the military, and anybody who was suspected was punished and expelled. And this is there are lots of research on this, and this is in Ukraine currently. What's going on in Ukraine, transgenders and non-binary people registered as male at birth are not considered men, and are considered men, become potential recruits. They're not allowed to leave Ukraine. So right now we have very little evidence, but some evidence trickling in on the way LGBT I communities are being routinely targeted in Ukraine by the Russian forces, and at checkpoints, at border crossings, and even as refugees, they are not welcome into Europe, or not be welcome into Europe because of lack of identification documents where the gender markers don't match with the presented gender identity, and they lose access to any kind of medical treatment that they are undergoing. And so basically the vulnerability that we're talking about of queer groups are multidimensional across a spectrum and range of dimensions. Economic, livelihood, and the support. And in Odisha, after the cyclones, there is the LGBT, the transgender groups had to be were trafficked and pushed into prostitution, because shelter homes become a hotbed of recruitment by traffickers. So these so economic, social, ecological, so the environmental degradation causes a massive poses a massive threat to food security. And food insecure groups, the transgender, intersex, and other non-urban LGBT groups are particularly vulnerable. And the COVID saw the educational disruptions and illiteracy, and this particularly even more so for marginal groups. So across a spectrum of vulnerability dimensions, whether it is political or physical or cultural or educational. Cultural, for instance, anytime a disaster happens, faith-based organizations think that it's caused by sexual transgression. So those aspects come into the picture, and so vulnerability is multidimensional. And what one can do is understand gender and queerness and integrate it into DRR. DRR is disaster risk reduction. And it is still not, we are talking about sustainable development goals, we're talking about G20, we're talking about the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, we're talking about Prime Minister's 10-point agenda. So there are lots of canonical global policies at work to reduce disaster risk, to mitigate climate change risks, to respond in a humanitarian manner through a rights-based approach to identities caught in the crossfires of political crossfires and conflict. But the LGBTQ and queer experience is entirely invisibilized, and there is a huge vacuum in terms of governance and policy response. So the social roles and the access to resources and information and the social relationships, we still have a very, very long way to go. And the queer question, I want to end with a little bit of, I'm sure you would have done some of these things in the earlier through the week, but I want to locate this within a disaster and conflict context, because I said the law is heteronormative and the law is binary. So even the term queer, for it to have a definition within policy for response, the semantic viability of the term, one requires more thought. How does it translate into policy? Because everything is homogenized and put into the words LGBTQI, but each identity across the gender spectrum, across the spectrum of sexual orientation, they're different. And when you, although I understand why there is an umbrella term like queer, in policy, what can we do? How to make it semantically viable? And these are questions of, again, history, because when we speak about the historicity of queerness in the Indian context, that there was always an existence of non-binary identities and queer differential sexual orientations in our texts and scriptures and so on, and it was Victorian morality imposed on us. But we live in an era where there is a historical continuity of colonial practices even after the striking down of 377. So how do we look at history and how do we overcome these historical continuities? So are we saying that we are is it a decolonial project to return to our roots, or is it towards a libertarianism? Those are some of the more theoretical and philosophical questions, and the policing of desires and identities, and how, these aspects are very much linked to governance, because there is a deep anxiety in society to morally police queer identities, and this anxiety is projected onto government forces and to preserve the moral question of society. So the society's anxieties are projected onto the constabulary practice, which is your police and your army and different ways of policing and surveillance. So how do we look at all of these? And of course, the entire there is a critique that there is the queer groups are not homogeneous, and it is an upper caste and masculine in nature. So how does one look at the diversity of the queerness and queer organization, mobilization, which is taking place in silos and so on? So how does one look at the questions of resistance and create a policy which is semantically viable and which responds in situations of conflict, which responds in situations of disasters, which responds when there is systemic failure, collapse, disruption, collective stress, and so how do we create such a policy? So this is where I would like to leave you all with, because as I said, there is a massive policy vacuum. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for exceptional participation. And also, I would like to thank you for making this session a memorable part of our journey. So I would now request Professor Vibhuti Patel for her remarks.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Yeah, Lavanya, you have exposed us to a very, very important thing, and it's a very fresh in our mind, because we have also experienced this thing at a ground level during the 2 years of pandemic. So it's very fresh. Even the testimonies of women who were involved in counseling and providing support to survivors of earthquake in Kutch, or riots in Baroda in Gujarat 2002, or tsunami in the whole 4 coastal regions of our country. I think that there are so many parallels are there. Your mind-boggling questions, I think they need to be located in a completely new way of human liberation framework, because even in the decolonial project, we can't forget caste. No? If we want to our pre-British era, there also things were not so hunky-dory or very distinct to the community people from ours is a very systematically hierarchized society based on caste and also now religion. So what would be the way forward? I just wanted everyone to think about it, and you also, particularly my question.
Invisibilization of queer realities in conflict and disaster situations. Even gender has been a very new entrant, because the response and relief has always been centered around the idea of family with a male breadwinner bias. Even the differential vulnerabilities, even within binary paradigms, even if we have to say men and women, even within those paradigms, there is a massive lacuna, policy vacuum on how women and girl children are treated. So gender minorities are not even in the picture. Sexual minorities are not even in the picture. So there has to be more conversations. And I'm glad that this topic was included in a conversation on queer studying, looking beyond binaries. So even the queer groups have to look at disruptions and systemic failures in disaster context. I mean, everyday life is so difficult. It's so it becomes even more amplified in disaster context. So the way forward, and as you rightly pointed out, it's we live in a deeply casteist society, and the reality, so the intersectionality of, say, a queer lower caste person, the burdens of identity, and it renders them even more marginalized, and it pushes them down the hierarchy to access relief and any kind of resource. So there has to be more conversations, and in these large platforms, and with more empirical evidence, there's a research vacuum as well, and then there is, and therefore it's there's a long way to go. As practitioners, we have to come together. Yes,
You're right.
Thank you, Professor Vibhuti Patel, and thank you, Dr. Lavanya Arvind. I will now open the floor for questions from the audience. So you're free to raise your hand or type it out in the Q&A section.
Hello, you can unmute yourself and speak. Maybe I think for the first time they are exposed to this discourse on disaster and queer stuff.
Ma'am, Professor, I would request you to type, if you have any questions, I would request you to type it out in the Q&A section, given we are running a bit late on time. So I would humbly request that from you. Professor Patel, if you could.
Yeah, please go ahead. Invite them. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you once again. I would move forward. Moving forward, I would request Maya Avasthi to start the session. Yes, so Maya Avasthi is the co-founder of Transgender Welfare Equity and Empowerment Trust, TWEET Foundation, and Maya Avasthi will be taking the session on contemporary legal and judicial proceedings and way forward. Over to you, Maya Avasthi.
Thank you, Sam. And I like to thank Vibhuti, ma'am, Sam, and the entire team of IMPRI for giving me a chance to again speak on one of the topic which is related to our judiciary and legal rights. Most of you will be shocked by seeing me because the day one I was looking something different. Today I'm looking different. But the reason I'm putting like this because topic is related to this identity and how this identity or any a true identity doesn't match with the one which identity you want to you've been carrying it from so many years. So this is one of the reason I have not came in my true identity. So can we go ahead with the topic? Next slide, please. So last session, I have ended my discussion over the British period. When we talk about the history, we talk about the even of Mughal Empire and everything. Then we came to the history of British, where the hijras were not accepted and protected and used to be protected and benefited by some Indian state through entering into the hijra community. But the British colonial law, when they came, they started criminalizing hijra community and denied them the civil rights. Hijras were also considered to be the separate caste. During that time, it was put as a tribe, not even as a caste, but as a tribe. And hence the tribal law was introduced in 1871, and they have put across the country. Next, please. Next slide, please. So what does the tribal law talk about? So tribal law says that any person who, any tribal person moving from one place to another place have to register their movement. Every movement have to be registered, and not to be registered only from the place where the person is moving. Also, it have to register in the place where the person is from and to. If both the place, the registration, the record should be there, and it was kept with the officials so that they can verify and cross-check with each other. And they have clearly mentioned, in my slides, I have given the references, and I have given the link of Tribal Law 1871, which clearly mentioned tribes and eunuchs. So during that times, hijra was not used; it was eunuch. So eunuch was has been mentioned into that thing. Next, please. So here I would like to get it from the some point from the Criminal Tribal Act. It was only that the onset of colonial rule from 18th century onwards that the situation changes drastically. During the British rule, legislation was enacted to supervise the deeds of hijra. Transgender committee called the Communal Tribe Act 1871. We deemed the entire community of hijra population or person as intimate criminal. Such person should be arrested without warrant and sentenced to imprisonment up to 2 years or fine or both. From this time, the hijras were obstructed and looking upon them in the bad light came into existence in the society. The act, however, was replaced in 1959. So we had a very rich culture and which is a good respect for hijras and third gender till the time of Mughals. But when the Britishers came, the things have changed, and it have changed drastically. It was told that it was framed like that: we are part sort of a tribal people who move from one place to another and do all the illegal activities. Okay, but as I said last time also, in 1959, when the act was adopted in Indian IPC, even that time it was not taken into the consideration how to make it more better. So next slide, please. So if you see, it was in 1871, it was a Criminal Tribe Act, where when we adopted the law in 1959, it became the Habitual Offender Act, because the word habitual means the repetitive, the person who do repetitive thing. So we were already formed as a criminal. And if you see the record of last from 1871 to 1947, our name were transgender or hijra name were on the part of regular doing a crime. So they become like a habitual offended act. But if you go in 1989, you have a Bilas and Basha case of Madhya Pradesh. I have given the link of this case. The entire reading of the case has already been given in the slide. So once you get it, you will read the slide. It's about the hijra people, a person talking about the rights of property rights, or her rights for herself. But then in 2014, we came a very important decision from Supreme Court. Is the court upheld the right to self-identify of gender. I will speak about it in a slide, but then we have to see this history of 2014 remarkable historical statement which given by the Supreme Court. It was not that easy. It took 13 years. It started in 2001, when the first is what put in the case, and great community leaders like Lakshminarayan Tripathi, Zainab Patel, they went forward, and Gauri Sawant, they went forward and spoke to the government that now where are we talking about? Where are we been placed? What is our identity? And it took 13 years to get an identity. So it's not only 13 years, it is a 75 years of independence. After that, we got this identity. Okay. Then in 2015 to 18, the entire story of Transgender Act came. I'll give you the entire proceeding, how the case proceeded from one year to another year. But in 2019, they came the Transgender Act, and then Transgender Act became Transgender Rule and Regulation in 2020. Next, please. So the NALSA judgment in 2012, NALSA Judgment Authority of India extended its support to the transgender and filed a petition with the Honorable Supreme Court on their behalf. So in 2001, it started. In 2021, NALSA entered into it and they filed the petition. And after 2 years, on April 15, 2014, Supreme Court, landmark ruling, upheld that the fundamental right granted by the Constitution will be equally applicable to them and recognize them as a third gender. My only question to it was why we were asked to go to court. The last line that upheld that the fundamental right guaranteed by the Constitution will be equally applicable to them and recognize them as a third gender. If I am a by nationality, I am an Indian, I have the full right of Constitution of India. And if I have a full right of Constitution of India, why should I should ask for my fundamental rights from court? That is the first thing. But this is a very interesting case study. NALSA judgment itself is a very interesting case study. Last time I spoke about NALSA judgment, I spoke about different identity of transgender in a very mythological format, mainly into the history format, so that it shows that it's nothing in Western influence. It is within India. Second important thing was this judgment was made on our fundamental rights, that is Article 14, 15, 16, 19, 1A and 21. If you see even Section 377, when it was reappealed, it was taken away, it was recriminalized. Most of the articles were also considered at that time of giving away the criminalization of Section 377. Next, please. What are the key points of the verdict? The Supreme Court in his historic judgment created the third gender, the status of them which will play a major role in creating society inclusive for all gender. The third gender right to decide their self-identity gender, it also upheld and center and state government are directed to grant legal recognition of the gender identity as male, female or third gender. So a person can self-identify its gender. And it has clearly mentioned that this does not mean they have to undergo a hormone treatment or any surgical treatment. Without surgical treatment, without hormone treatment, without any interventional surgery, any transition process, a person can identify himself or herself as male, female, or third gender. Supreme Court ordered the center to recognize third gender as a society and economically background. So this was a debatable question that the third gender was put into an OBC category. The debatable question came here that if third gender is kept into OBC category, then what about those third gender, or what about those people who identify themselves with third gender? What about those people who identify themselves as third gender, but they already have ST and SC class? So it's like getting a privileged double time. So there's what a debate going on, and still the debate is still there. The Apex Court directed the central and as well as the state government to run social welfare scheme for the betterment of the third gender community and to create awareness among the common mass to eradicate the stigma regarding the culture, belief, religion, and gender. The court also reiterated the reservation must be granted to the third gender in education and employment and asking them to classify the OBC. Here is the point when entire community stand up and said, we don't want to be part of the OBC. Absence of law recognizing third gender as a transgender as a third gender can not debar them from getting job and education. They must be provided equal opportunity in availing employment and education. One of the important things we have to consider here that Supreme Court have not only ordered one government, Supreme Court had ordered both the government, state government and central government. So it is an overall ruling. I'm going to say no court will say that. No state can say, ye to wahan ka court ka decision hai, we will not put it into our state because it's not our. So this has been all state were given, and even the union territory was because of central government. So it's union territory were also considered into it. Next, please. State and government should take proper measure to provide medical care to TG in the hospital and also provide them separate public toilet and other facility. They also in this they have also mentioned that there should be a separate bed reserved, not a room, but at least a bed reserved for third gender in private hospitals, sorry, in public hospitals, government-run public hospital, one of the state-run government hospital. It was mentioned that. Clarifying the amenity legal status of SRS as a sex assessment, surgery, and provide gender transition and SRS services with proper pre and post-operation transition, along with transitioning counseling for free in public hospital in various parts of India. Now, it's been 2014. Now it is almost getting to the 10 years of the wording, but still we don't have any hospital which gives free of cost transition services. I will come. You may put the question that बहुत सारे states में तो free of cost होता है, but it is just because of the state policy. It's not about the NALSA judgment recommendation. Okay, it is a state policy which has been created, or some state which are more progressive, who do not wait for the state policy also. Places like Tamil Nadu, Kerala, they didn't have a policy, but they still were giving it. But most of the progressive state, Maharashtra, which we entire India look upon it, when I come from, Bulti ma'am come from, we don't have that state policy, neither we have any hospital which give free of cost transitioning services, even Delhi. Ensure greater involvement of vulnerable community, including Hijra or transgender, in policy formation and program development. Right to marriage and adoption were the only rights which were not granted by Supreme Court. So Supreme Court have given entire services, like entire thing, like all the wish list was fulfilled except right to marriage and adoption. Next, please. But if the NALSA judgment was there, what was the reason for coming a transgender bill? Supreme Court is the supreme authority of India. Any decision given by the Supreme Court, uske upar koi nahi aata, Parliament mein nahi aata. Okay. So why it is needed to get a transgender bill? It was seen that after 5 years of transgender bill, there were no transgender decision, I'm going to say NALSA judgment, there were no thing on the planning. There were no action taken by state or the central government. And that's the reason the transgender bill came. So now history of the transgender bill is a private member bill was introduced in Rajya Sabha, the upper house, by Tiruchi Shiva. It is a politician from Kerala in 2014 to guarantee rights and provide welfare measure for transgender person. This bill was passed in Rajya Sabha and it was introduced in Lok Sabha, the lower house, and it's still pending. I'm going to say, frankly speaking, government have said to pull out this bill from the, they have some concern and they pull out the bill, and government themselves introduced their version of the bill. I was in Delhi when entire thing was going on. We went to multiple times to Dharna, we went to multiple times to parliament hearing and all. In 2016, the government introduced the transgender bill in Lok Sabha. In 2016, it was referred to standing committee. July 17, standing committee gave their report. On the recommendation, it was placed to, or it was introduced to Lok Sabha, and it was passed on August 2019, and November 2019, even Rajya Sabha passed. So when two houses passes any bill, it become an act, it become a law. Parliamentary law. So वो एक reason था कि this bill converted it as an act. Next, please. So what are the sign feature of transgender bill? So transgender bill was passed in November 2019 and it became an act called as a transgender person protection of right act 2019. An act to provide for protection of rights of transgender person and their welfare, and for matters concerned whether therewith and incidental thereto. It is under the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment and Department of Social Justice and Empowerment. Enhancement from or implement from 5th December 2019. It had total 9 chapters, 9 different chapters, and it has 23 subsections. So each chapter have some subsection into it. Next, please. Now, before I get into these chapters, I want to tell you the interesting story that once this act was introduced, it took a year to get it implemented because COVID aa gaya. COVID, we were not able to do any training of the people, government official and all. But more than that, for first 2-3 months, there was a big fight between government and community because many thing was not in the favor of community and it was amended multiple times. Second thing, Transgender Act was not aligned with NALSA judgment. The very first example I can give it to you. If you remember, I said NALSA judgment, Supreme Court have given the right of self-identity to an individual to select or to confirm his gender, his or her gender, male, female, or other. But Transgender Act says it is a district magistrate or the collector who will decide and give the certificate of transgender. So it is like, it is a condiment of the court itself that अगर court ने जब एक ruling दे दिया है, आप उसकी ruling नहीं मानते हो, अपना कुछ rule लाते हो, तो आप court की insult कर रहे हो या अपमान कर रहे हो court का. So that is one of the part which was done. There were multiple things. I will come to one by one chapter and I will talk about it. So chapter 1, I have given the before the session, our 5 days training start. I have already given the transgender bill for reading. Samriddhi and the team would have shared with you. Also, I would say that I have given the English version. NALSA and Transgender Act both are in Hindi version also. We have a Hindi version PDF file. So please go through it. It's a very interesting document to read. So primarily it talks about what is the definition of transgender, all those things. It have three divisions. Prohibition against discrimination. It talks about stigma and discrimination. Recognition. This chapter 3 is very important because whom to be identified as third gender has been clearly mentioned into it. Okay. Irony is that non-binary members are been out, non-binary identified members are out of it within the act. If you read, there is no definition or no description about non-binary into it, but they have included in intersex. But then intersex is a different identity. 4 is what are the welfare measured by government. It talks about various schemes and all. 5th is the obligation of establishment and other people. It talks about the reservations in reservation and also employment rights, education rights, the property rights of transgender. 5th, 6 social security, education, social security and health of transgender. Okay, now section 6 of transgender talks about talk about the education system make as a reservation hona chahiye and all those things. National Council of Transgender should be formed, which is already formed in by the Indian government, and it have also talked about the forming of a welfare board in every state. Offense and penalty and miscellaneous. Now, main important thing is the identity. When you talk about recognition of identity of gender transgender person, here they have section 6, which clearly mentioned that person have. Can I show the screen? I'm going to say, can I show the? I will. You don't have Samriddhi. I will open the transgender bill and I can show it. Give me a sec. because this understanding is more important. Can you see? Okay, so I'm talking about this section. Recognition and identity of transgender person. Now, this talk about this is the very important chapter to understand the entire पूरा मसाला जो है main जो point है वो इसी point में है. Okay. Recognition of identity of third gender. A person shall have a right to be recognized as such in accordance with the provision of this act. A person recognized as transgender under subsection shall have a right to prescribe gender identity. So person have to do, but then it have to be in an affidavit. नालसा जजमेंट ने बोला था ब्लैंक पेपर पे लिखे के देंगे तो भी चलेगा, पर यहाँ पे इसने बोला है एफिडेविट होना बहुत जरूरी है. Now application of certificate of identity. A transgender person may make an application to magistrate for issuing a certificate of identity as transgender person in such a form and manner accomplished with such document as may be prescribed. Prescribed may, there are two documents which has been prescribed. One is in fact, three documents. One is the affidavit copy, which has been notarized by any notary person. Second is the address proof. And third is the photograph. Now, if you see the format of affidavit, it clearly said your dad name, your father name, and you have to write son and daughter, and you have to mention your address and preferred name. So it became a mandate that you have to specify that thing. For the only reason when your transgender card comes, it will have both the things, so dad name and your preferred name. That provide in the case of minor, application should be made by parents and guardian of the child. Now, where we talk about that being a trans child, it is a stigma, no parents accept it. How many of the parents will go and get this done? The person have to wait till 18 to get this certificate. So that's another loophole of the thing. Now the district magistrate shall be applicable under section 5. This is the 5. A certificate of identity as trans person after following such procedure in such form and manner within such time. Now they have not mentioned any format. They have not mentioned what was the time period they have to give the certificate. They have, it is very blank, a very blank format has been, timeline has been mentioned. As may be prescribed indicated than a person as a transgender. The gender of transgender person shall be recorded in all the official documents according with the certificate issue. Ye transgender act bolta hai. But then when you use that thing and you go to PAN card, Aadhaar card, and you go to any of your document change, even in your school and colleges, they don't take it into the consideration. जबकि ये पार्लियामेंट ने पास किया हुआ लॉ है. A certificate issued transgender shall consider the right of proof of recognition of his identity as transgender. So in my case, I am not got my condition. In my case, I have to carry my Aadhaar card, I have to carry my transgender card everywhere to specify that what is, I look at the female attire and what my card, government card talks, iske beech mein alignment nahi hai. So the third part is that transgender card which give the alignment because it has my dead name, my preferred name and addresses also, which is mentioned in all my government document. But one more important thing has been clearly mentioned that you only can't get the third gender identity. You can even come into the binary. You can change a gender also. So once the under section 6, you get your transgender certificate. It is section 7, which gives you that there is a chance you can become a gender. I mean, people in case of trans men, they are they're not comfortable with getting a trans identity on the document. They want male. Trans women don't want third gender, others, or transgender on their identity. They want female. So if they want to get a binary gender, then they can reissue the same process to magistrate. But here the catch is, if a transgender person undergoes surgery to change either as male or female, such person may make an applicant certificate issued by the district medical superintendent or chief medical officer of medical institution in such that person has undergone. Now, problem is that in India, there is no set rule of transitioning or any surgery procedure. None of the medical superintendent or chief medical officer write and give it to you that I have so-and-so person had undergone the surgery and he can be given, he has been identified now as a female. So in that case, what to do? District magistrate shall also receive on the application of certificate issued by medical superintendent. ये एक हो गया है. On being certified and all, the person who have undergone certificate under section 6 or revision shall be entitled to change the first name in the birth certificate and all other document. Now, what is the catch where we have found? Now we have also said that person have a gender identification, GID certificate, or laser treatment or hormone treatment. Even that certificate can also use to go for this gender change thing, not only the surgery thing. So this was an important thing which I wanted to show. I am just stopping the share. Sam, you can just share the PPT. Next, please. Just go back. Now, offense and penalty is one of the important thing that in the Transgender Act, the maximum punishment is 2 years for as in penalty for any offense. So if you're raped by someone, then also the 2 years. But as per the IPC, it is 10 years or hang till death, the most updated rape law. Okay, so this is one thing which I have to get into the consideration, that there were very loophole in the Transgender Protection Act. But since it was done during the last stage of when even COVID has started hitting the entire world, there were no more debates were going on. We were all locked in the room. And that was the one thing where we have lost the case of getting an amendment in the Transgender Act. Next, please. So just my last slide. I know it's too long day for you guys. Now, way forward. Now, my topic have clearly mentioned what should be the way forward. I want to say, frankly speaking, as a trans person, we never have thought of the way forward, but then particularly karna tha, so I just gave my way forward. So as per the Transgender Act and NALSA judgment, it is said that Transgender Protection Cell should be there in each district. So in India or even in Maharashtra, if you see, there are hardly any district who have. I'm a part of a Mumbai Transgender Welfare, Mumbai Transgender Protection Cell in Mumbai. I'm one of the member, but then it is not applicable in the nearby city also. They don't have their protection cell. This act, the Protection Cell act like one of a committee which sees that any stigma discrimination case not happening, any violence is not happening, that has to be taken care of. So formation of Transgender Welfare Board was one of the important decisions given by even NALSA judgment and even talked about in Transgender Act. Now, most of the state had Transgender Welfare Board, but problem was that they were not functional. It was just form. All state and union territory have to create a transgender policy. I have already shared with Sam few of the transgender policy. Odisha, Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Assam. Chhattisgarh is also one. We have from Kerala, we have from Chennai, but then I gave 3 or 4 policies so that we understand how these policies align with each other. When it is state policy, it is not aligned with each other. The problem is that all state policy talks different languages. equal and proper allotment of gender budget within the each district, and it need to be taken care by social welfare department. No one knows there is a something called as gender budget, and it is with the corporation. It doesn't have even with the social welfare department. Equal employment and equal voice of transgender within government department and organizations. So there will be equal right of employment within government organizations. District collector, magistrate, along with social welfare department, officer and staff need to be trained in the how to issue a transgender identity. Each district magistrate, each district collector speaks their own definition of issuing transgender certificate. I'm going to say, I've been asked multiple times to go and talk to people. I've been asked to talk to the principal secretary of social welfare department. I mean, I have tired. Now they always say like, you know, आप पूरे district का session क्यों नहीं लेते हो? मैंने बोला bill मैं नहीं ले सकते हैं, because it's not my duty, it's your duty. And this was the only reason, because this act came in during COVID. All Zoom calls, and we know how Zoom calls are been taken care of. Okay. All line department need to be aware about transgender card and need to be considered a document for legal change of document. This is one of the most important things. We all are. None of the colleges or I'm not talking about colleges, university and board, they don't consider transgender card, because the major problem is our education certificate, because these are the documents which go for the employment. So these are my way forward. This time I made my PPT very short, because I know last time I just overshooted my time. So और last PPT रहेगा तब से तो बोर अभी last वाले भी होते हैं, तो मैंने बहुत छोटा किया था. Please, I'm open with all the question. Thank you, Sam and ma'am.
I would like to once again extend our sincerest appreciation for.
Wait. One topic which I have not covered, I know this will come as a question. I'm just going to talk about it. It is the Mumbai Binaries Act.
Yeah, very important.
Very important topic. Give me a second.
A student of mine has done a dissertation on it.
Yeah. So Mumbai Binaries Act was introduced in
Mumbai, 1959, Mumbai Prohibition Act.
Yeah. So Bombay Binaries Act, it was introduced. It was introduced by in
1959, no? Mumbai.
Yeah,
Mumbai
1959. Yeah,
Mumbai
1959.
Prohibition Act.
Yeah. So this was introduced in 1959, but been adopted by 22 states within the Indian contest, and they have customized this as per their own state-wise. Okay. So now, what does the state? What this Binaries Act defines? Now, the Binaries Act defines that if anyone is being trafficked or is been getting into begging in any form, either in a form of dance, singing, or any form, it is an act. Or if anyone has been asked to beg, I'm going to say, I can have an entire gang of people who have been, a child has been trafficked, or even from the tribal people have been trafficked and been asked to beg. It also is a problem. Second thing is it also talk about that if it is done in the form of any act as a support to family. I'm going to say if you find that someone is begging because he or she doesn't have a place to stay, or it been talking, saying that it has been done because there is emergency medical aid required in the home, and then you have been, or someone who is homeless. One of the important definition of Beggary Act is that if you find someone who doesn't look as a normal person, I'm going to say by clothing and behavior, and you've been loitering in the place, in a public place for a long time, and you have an assumption that he or she may be a beggar, even that can be considered to be get into the Beggary Act. Okay. One of the important thing is that this act was how it was implemented.
Oh, no.
So in 2010, when Commonwealth Game was happening in Delhi, that time everyone who was into begging were picked up and were put into jail. But we should understand, in Delhi, 2008, in 2008, the Beggary Act was been removed. Sorry, 2018, it was removed from the state of that they have decriminalized begging. But the irony is that when we all know G20 is going on, or G20 has been going on for many years, for many months. I was in Delhi on 13th April, having an event on gender-based violence. And during that time, all the transgenders were picked up from the traffic signal and they were put under the lockup to show that India doesn't have any beggars on the streets. And they were not even told on what, कौन से केस पे, कौन सी धारा पे लेके जा रहे हैं उनको उठा के लेके गया गया. Okay, if you see even in Mumbai, all the slums had shades, tin shades, and they were not allowed to, like, they were shown that we don't have slums. So that is one thing. Now, what are we talking? One of the important part which goes against transgender is that even entering any private premises for the purpose of begging is also come under Begging Act. So we all know, हम जो किन्नर लोग हैं वो बधाइयां लेने जाते हैं शादी और बच्चे होने पे या कोई भी खुशी के माहौल में, और उस केस में उसको भी बेगिंग एक्ट के अंदर डिफाइन कर दिया गया है. बिकॉज अमेंड नहीं किया, ये पहले से डिफाइंड है, पर देन वो उस एक्ट को भी उसके अंदर डिफाइन हो जाता है. ओके, या फिर ऐसे कोई लोग जो अपनी इंजुरी दिखाते हैं, वुंड दिखाते हैं या अपनी बीमारी दिखाते हैं एंड देन गेट डू बेगिंग. This is not allowed. Okay. Now, problem is that what is the section 2 talking about? Section 2 talking about these definitions of begging. Now, who is been asked, given the permission to give, like who can act as a gatekeepers? So, any police person or any authorized person on behalf of police can arrest these beggars or these people without a warrant. आपको पता है, हमको सबको पता है कि वारंट होना बहुत जरूरी है अगर कस्टडी में लेना है तो, और बेगर्स को पकड़ने के लिए कस्टडी की जरूरत नहीं है. बट इफ इट, जैसे हमने बोला प्राइवेट प्रॉपर्टी में अगर कोई जाके बेग करता है तो वो पुलिस वहां पे नहीं आ सकती है. वहां पे उनको जब तक वहां का जो प्राइवेट प्रॉपर्टी का ओनर्स है जब तक कंप्लेन नहीं करते तो पुलिस को आना पड़ता है. And we know that when kinners go for begging on auspicious occasion, there's always a crisis of demand of money, and by default the house people call the police कि हमें बहुत तंग कर रहे हैं जड़े आके, you know, all those things. The offense of this is that अगर आप सॉरी पेनल्टी ये है कि आप पकड़े जाते हैं तो आपको 1 साल का सजा मिलता है और यू आर पुट इनटू द बेगरी हाउस। ओके, नाउ प्रॉब्लम इज एक बार हो गया, पकड़ के गए, वो हो गया। सेकेंड टाइम हुआ तो 5 साल, और तीसरे तीसरे बार पकड़ा गया तो 10 साल। ऐसा ये रूल है इसका। बट most of the time, and they have not, and there is a provision that they should be immediate, once they are arrested they should be immediately shown at the court. आप उनको लॉकअप में ज्यादा देर रख नहीं सकते हो, ये रूल है। और मैजिस्ट्रेट हैज द एंटायर राइट टू से that if the person is not looking as a beggar, और उसका कुछ इंटेंशन नहीं था लॉन्ग टाइम बेगिंग का, या some conditional या situational begging कर रहा है, so on a goodwill he can he can leave that person writing a bond that he or she will not do it again. My only thing is बहुत सारी जगह पे ये बेगरी एक्ट implement होता है। These transgender beggars have no option of employment, where cis people are okay, we can get them job and all, but then no employment has been for transgender. In that case, begging is the only option left, and it is a traditional option, traditional work thing which been doing for many years. And it doesn't only have kinners, but also jyotis who do this begging in form of doing puja, and they ask for the bhiksha from the people. So it is lot of to be thought process to be given on begging act. It been always been voice out that begging act have to be taken off, like Delhi have taken away, even other state have to taken back. But then, or they should exclude transgender from it, because transgenders, the only source of earning is begging and sex work. We are also talking about legalizing sex work. So these are the point. This PPT was not, this part was not part of the PPT. I'm so sorry for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Continuing, where I left. So I would like to once again extend our sincerest appreciation for gracing us with your esteemed presence during our session. Thank you so much. And Vibhuti ma'am, I request you to provide your remarks.
Thank you, Mayaji, for providing such a comprehensive understanding of the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act and rules and their implications, and with such an important first-hand examples that you have given. I think it has also made us more convinced that why we need to really work on it, and we have to problematize this act and also get the public consensus to make amends. Other thing is that the question of quota and reservation, I think that needs to be taken up very seriously, because it is very much related to the material reality. Because unless this abject condition and the stigma which they are facing, I think we need to take it up much more seriously. Budgetary allocation, it is not only the duty of only Ministry of Welfare, Social Welfare and Social Defense to do it. It has to be across every ministry. No ministry can say we have nothing to do with queer, whether it is Ministry of Education, Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Ministry of Industry, Ministry of Women and Child. Every ministry has to take up this issue, because there are 5 important areas in we have massive gap: education, health, employment, violence against transgender people, and 5th one is a representation, voice and decision-making power. They are not there. Yesterday, Harish IRG gave so many examples why it is important that not only in the Pride committee, but in each and every committee, you need to have a queer person, because otherwise you take all the decisions with keeping into consideration the binary reality. That is one. So when it comes to civil, political, socio-cultural and economic rights, I think we need to have this comprehensive approach. And these are the learnings of all lectures that we have had, 20 lectures that we have had, which is first time we see that on one particular platform, such a comprehensive examination with nuances, geographical variation, the caste-based hierarchies that you are facing, and the differential impact it has in a different situation, whether it is in in the world of work or in the political sphere in the socioeconomic sphere, and also at the time of disaster. So even that also we have included in this workshop. I think I'm really impressed by the commitment of the participants who have been glued. Almost all the sessions from day one have continued for 4 hours. Yesterday also we finished at 10 o'clock. And from day one, they have been very seriously engaging with the discussion also, because yesterday we began the session with discussion and so many of them responded and we had a very good dialogue. So now with this, I would like to thank you once again.
Thank you, Professor Patel. Now the floor is open for questions from the audience.
Even if there are no questions, you can respond. How you find this is the last session. So when your response to the whole course, what are the limitations? How can we improve it? What are the areas which are still missing that can be included? Because we have not taken the queer persons with disability. That is still that topic. We did not get the resource person to speak on that. No.
Yes, I would sincerely urge the participants to make this this few minutes count, and let's make it interactive. Let's end it on a positive, wholesome note.
Because Mayaji was the first one and she is the last one to interact. So I think we have a continuity.
Please raise your hand. Yeah, please raise your hand, everyone. I mean,
unmute yourself and speak. Yeah, please.
Any feedback, any key takeaways, anything.
There is a queue. When do we get our certificates for the course? Okay, that the organizers can say. Yeah. Komal Purohit, please unmute and speak.
Hello, ma'am, and hello, Maya, ma'am, and hi, Samriddhi. I'm a research student, and my area of study is the portrayal of LGBTQ in the Hindi films, specific Hindi films. And I'm glad that I took this 5 days, a workshop, and I attended all the seminars. So I'm actually working at IIM Ahmedabad right now, and I'm working there. And so for me, at 6 o'clock used to be my work hours used to get over, and then I used to sit at the campus. Like today also I'm sitting at the campus. It's and because I was so interested, and I'm glad that I could listen to all these speakers, and I've gained great knowledge. I've also collected the email IDs of some of the speakers whom I might connect in future, and I would also like to connect with you, Vibhuti ma'am, because I think that it's going to be a great experience for me to even further connect with you and learn from you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I will learn from you. I think I'm also for me, queer studies is a work in progress.
I'm just stepping into the world of academics, ma'am. So I think it will be a great experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, Tripti.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for organizing this 360-degree aspect of, because I've been by profession, I'm a statistician converted a business leader. 2 years ago, I did the counseling certification, and I'm working from last 2-3 years in the gender sensitization in the area of Pune with the Curve Institutes, and via that I've reached more than 3,000 students, and there also the college students was something that they started, and the idea was to start setting up gender cells. And that's how I thought that I need to get into understanding at national levels and various aspects. So I think this hard work, like the earlier participants said, that it was like, after 6:30 sitting through was certainly an effort, but I am very, very thankful because it is so enriching. I have also noted down various numbers, and I think it will take me a lot of time because I don't necessarily come from these backgrounds, so I need to learn a lot, read a lot. But I'll be certainly connecting with you, Vibhuti madam, most likely, because right now we are limited, I think, Maharashtra Pune region, but as I am getting into and connecting with students, it is very, very evident that the reach needs to be expanded. So I will certainly connect either through our institution or maybe individually. So thank you so much to speakers and Maya ji. I mean, I was so thrilled with your opening and closing both sessions. So hats off to the work that you've been doing and the way you're presenting it here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Trupti ji. Yeah, thank you. So
Yeah.
We have Parmit Phillips.
Yeah. So it was a wonderful session and it came at very suitable timing because I work in Axiom, which work towards financial inclusion. So we have been here since the 60s, but ever since our focus on gender has always been limited to women. And this is here, to be very frank, it's just a couple of months before we started our focus to understand what is the financing gap for the community. And I was doing a lot of desk research on my end, trying to talk with NGOs, but the kind of topics that were covered during the training course, you won't find all this information anywhere else. So I will definitely go back and go through the recordings over and over again. So it was very resourceful. And one feedback from my end was like, this is a group of people who are really interested in learning more about it. And this can be a very good resource group. So now at the moment, we do not have enough visibility into who all are a part of this group. I think that synergy would be great to explore. If you can create a brief of everybody who attended and share it, we can explore the synergies and make a meaningful impact altogether. And once again, thank you so much for this.
Good evening. Thank you, Vibhuti ma'am and Maya ma'am. It's lovely to see you again. I have worked closely with you, so I know how dynamic she is in terms of her working strategy. And these 5 days were like very immersive, intensive, I would say, training, because as with the previous participants, I come from a background where I don't know much about it. So I wanted to explore. I wanted to know whether for whom I'm working. So because I call myself as a trans ally. So like in what extent and to what extent I can benefit, and create a society. So I also have this problem with the word inclusion. Why to include? Like, we are all humans. So I work on that particular platform. So different perspective from different corners of our country, getting that and understanding the entire thing was like, it was mind boggling for me. I would say I still need time to process everything. And the resource material which you have provided is exemplary. I would say I'm reading that one by one and understanding how we can go about it. And lastly, I would say that word which Rituparna ji has said, that, repair work. So I guess repair work is what I believe in. आपने किया है नुकसान तो आप ही भरो. तो definitely we as a, I would say, cis community has to take this responsibility for this repair work somewhere. And lastly, one more thing I want to add, as the previous participant has said, if we can interact with each other, we can see each other and connect with each other. I guess collaborative efforts always make changes rather than, individually everybody working in a cocoon. So thank you so much for this opportunity and bringing so much of knowledge. When I say experience, I would rather say experience to this platform. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Thank you once again for this beautiful opportunity, I would say. I got to know about this program through my university only. And the moment I saw the title and the rest of the details, I thought, this is something that I really should do. I teach history in Christ University, and we do have courses on gender and gendered histories particularly. And one demand or feedback from students had been that they want to know more about the LGBTQ plus communities and include that in the course and the curriculum for that matter. So I took this as an opportunity to know more, and this was, really, really eye-opening and inspiring. So thank you once again, Professor Vibhuti Patel, Samrithi, Maya Avastiji, all other resource persons. It was really, really helpful. And thank you for all the readings once again. I would definitely like to reach out to most of you. We would really like to collaborate with most of you as well. So what we do for past few years have been, we've been organizing workshops, 2-3 days of gender studies workshops also. So I am really looking forward to meeting you all once again at one point or the other. So thank you once again. And this has been really, really Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So moving. Gagandeep Kaurji and Riya Yadavji, are you ready? Are you there? You can unmute and speak.
Yeah, Anusha ji too wants to speak.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, you can just unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Anusha ji or Riya ji.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Hello, everyone. I just really want to extend my heartfelt thanks to you all for organizing such an interesting, riveting, erudite, and really inspiring workshop. And it was really, really very enlightening, and I learned a lot from this workshop. I look forward to attending many more. And once again, a heartfelt thanks to you all. Thank you.
Where do you work and what do you do?
Ma'am, I am a research scholar at Punjab University, Chandigarh. So I got to know this from one of my friends, and I'm really thankful to her also. And yesterday I sent her a message that thanks for, sending this brochure to me, because I really feel so grateful that I got to know about this opportunity. Had I not attended this, I would have missed so much. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Nishadin Galeji.
Hello, a very good evening to everyone. Am I audible?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So firstly, it's just been um, an amazing experience for me. So I basically come from a STEMS background. I have a degree in physics, and after that, I worked for 3 years as a sales engineer. And I believe that I explored most of the industries. I saw all kinds of workspaces. Upon that, what was really frustrating for me and why I left that field is because I come from a marginalized background. I belong to the Dalit community, and I always had that perspective, and I didn't see myself fit being in a purely technical role, and having education in a STEMS environment. There was it's really dry when we speak about humanities, the subjects like queerness, or even talking about anything even remotely close to politics. It's seen as kind of taboo. People tend to run away in the STEMS uh, environment, and I always had an issue fitting in there. However, at the moment, I have decided to make a move into the field of public policy or humanities as a whole. So I'm preparing for entrance exams and everything. So my intention of attending this uh, online summer school, and what I wanted to really get out of this is basically listening out to people, and experts of the fields that represent real problems of real people. And another approach that I came with is like, I personally have experienced certain kinds of discriminations, and if I am not aware about other people in the society who are going through uh, different kinds of dissemination, I feel that it's a loss on both the ends. If I'm not extrapolating my empathy to other groups, I think that's a major loss for us as a society. So yeah, I mean that's what I feel. So thank you so much for everyone, and Maya ji, it was really a pleasure listening to you uh, in the first session and the last. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I would request Mayaji for a few final words as we're running out of time. And yeah, Mayaji, over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Arjun sir and Vibhuti ma'am. It was like, blessing for me to be a part of this. Vibhuti ma'am, I understand. Or I remember the day on the University of Mumbai, we discussed about this, and then I I jump on it, and I felt like, no thinking back, may on the spot decision de I will be part of it. This is a very unique course, which because of 2 decades of work, I've never seen such intensive course wherein that's what I wrote, like, these scores should be now replicated or implemented by various universities and colleges, specifically colleges who are working on social, they have a social welfare department, social क्या बोलते हैं MSW, सोशल वर्क वाला जो डिवीजन होता है जहाँ पे, और द रिसर्च जहाँ पे होती है, उन कॉलेजेस में और यूनिवर्सिटी में इनको रिप्लीमेंट होना बहुत जरूरी है, रिप्लेस होना बहुत जरूरी है, या रिपीट होना बहुत जरूरी है. Most important, if we have this, there will be a report which will be created, and those reports should be shared with the dean and all the universities, so that they understand the real importance of this program. And of course, when you do this second version, let include gender or sexuality diverse people with disability, Bibhuti ma'am. And so I would say that if you need any resource person, I can get you, I can give you a person from trans disabled, so that they become one of the resource person for it. I'm also not a master, I'm not a technical expert on top on that topic, in spite being a trans person. But of course, I look forward for the report, final report, and I'll also try my level best to take it ahead with different level, specifically on government education system, education department, so that they can give a directive to all the institutes whom are reporting them, or they are monitoring, so that it goes a blanket format. Thank you.
Thank you, Dima.
Ma'am, closing remarks. Unmute, ma'am.
Yeah, Annaji, she spoke, Anna Varghese and Nishad. Arnold Philip, did you speak? Hello?
Yes, she did.
Yeah, I think in the closing remark, I'm terribly, I'm highly impressed with the commitment of the participants and the commitment of the resource persons also, because it took nearly 3 months of active search. And luckily for me, I traveled to Jammu and Tezpur and Guwahati, where I met so many activists from the queer movement. For me, it was always like, it is my 3 years of teaching, doing gender at TISS. That was the great learning experience and exposure to the queer studies. In the first time when I entered the class, and it was, this is the one class where you have 192 students, you can imagine. It's a foundation course. Elsewhere, you would have 50, 60, 30, 40, but in this particular, and the way I was questioned, and I think it was short of wooing, no, that here is a second generation feminist who only sees the queer issues in the framework of minority rights. Every minority has a right, and I talked about right-based perspective. But then it is their questioning, and their in the class where the moment I said sex is biological and gender is social, I was challenged. And I think this challenge, initially I was terrified, but it was my daughter who built my confidence. They said, no, Mama, I'm handling their case. They are genuinely asking. It's an ideological level, and you can also learn. So that motivated me. Even when the IMPRI decided to have this course, I just said, let's take someone who is a veteran, who is from the movement. But I think IMPRI team, they deposited their faith in me. And we saw to it, because of this diffidence, we saw to it that we want to make this course really the best. And that we just, all of us, we put in all our efforts to contact people, get the readings, and see to it that the brochure is very rich in covering all the gender spectrums and the queer studies. So I think it's a collective endeavor, and I think honesty of purpose. All of us says honesty of purpose. All 24 resource persons and the IMPRI team, they worked in tandem, and as a result of which we got this course. And I'm sure Mayaji told us that it should be discussed in our colleges. We already have women development cell. In that also we should take, and this cell have to be now changed to women and gender development cells. so that it becomes a platform, because it is part of the institutional structure of colleges and universities, and it with resources, because they have to have minimum 4 programs a year, because they have to send the quarterly report to Home Ministry and even to UGC and NHRD. So I think this spaces, I think we need to explore, and we should be reaching out to younger generation, all bureaucrats and politicians and communities, as well as the younger generation. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, and for your leadership to conduct this. Thank you so much. I would also like to announce and request all the researcher, or even also to you, Nishadji and others, if you have been investing so much into this, very immersive, but also try to write about it on any fact. If you like, submit it to us in our blog. If we have a large number of those papers, we'll make it into an edited book format. We'll also try for that book format with all of our experts. We're recording everything, and if Professor Patel will edit that, we'll bring it as a monograph also. But I will request all of the participants, we will share the profile of the participants to each other also for solidarity. We'll do that along with the certificate and other things. But I encourage all of you to participate, write about it. It's not necessarily in a week, in a month, but whenever you write with reference to the course or your learning, do share it with us. And if have a large number of it, we'll try to have it as a book periodic volume as ISBN. And Professor Patel, we were also discussing that maybe we will have a national or international conference on the issue in Mumbai, Sophia College, with ICSR. We are trying, so if we'll figure it out, we'll reach out to you also to join us there physically. Yes, ma'am, you're saying.
Yeah, and I think it should not be just an academic paper. Okay, you can send a poetry or painting or testimony, personal testimony, story, fictionalized version. Everything will have a place in it. It's not going to be just one particular academic format with the style sheet and all. You feel free to express the way you would like to. Yeah.
And so, Samriddhi, Sam, over to you for the vote of thanks.
So, with your due permission, ma'am, I would like to move ahead with the vote of thanks for the final time. Okay, so as we come to the end of day 5 of Beyond Binaries, understanding sexual identities and queer rights issues in India, an online international summer school program, a 5-day immersive online certificate training course, I, Samriddhi, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Center, GISC, New Delhi. We are grateful to our experts for the day 5 session, Dr. Debolina De, Dr. Devashish Mitra, Dr. Lavanya Ishanbhog Arvindji, Maya Avasthi, along with our other panelists, Dr. Kastav Padmapati ji, Sonal Gyani ji, Rituparna Nyog ji, Dr. Aksa Sheikh ji, Arokan ji, Vikramaditya Sahaya ji, Professor Mala Ramanathan ji, Professor Pushpesh Kumar ji, Mr. Adhiraj Parasarthi ji, Professor Veena Baswani ji, Vajanti Vasantamogli ji, Dr. Pratiti Burman ji, Harish Iyer ji, and Rituparna Bora ji for taking out their valuable time and giving us an opportunity along with the participants to learn from this online certificate program. I would like to especially thank Professor Vibhuti Patel for chairing the sessions. Recorded video of the session has been shared in your email. We thank all our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. We are grateful if you are watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on various podcasts or reading our publications. For the certificates, we will be sharing a feedback form with you to provide your details for the certificate and also to obtain your feedback and suggestions. Please mention your name correctly for the purpose of handling out the certificates. We have, okay, so we have also, just to make it clear, shared the recorded video of the training program in your email for your kind perusal. And in case you missed the live sessions, last but not the least, I would like to thank the organizing team, IMPRI Gender and Impact Study Center, for conducting the whole session in a smooth manner. We hope you continue to join us in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you a good day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I really enjoy. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Genuine thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week.
Thank you, Maj.
Thank you.